Some places refuse to be mapped. Williams Canyon cuts through the limestone bluffs just west of Manitou Springs, Colorado, a narrow wound in the earth that has drawn visitors since the Ute people first warned settlers away from its deeper recesses. The canyon walls rise 300 feet in places, striated with the pale sediment of ancient seas, and at its heart sits one of Colorado's oldest commercial caves, Cave of the Winds. The cave system was officially discovered in 1880 by two brothers exploring the canyon after a church picnic, though local accounts suggest prospectors and indigenous peoples knew of its entrance decades earlier. By 1900, it had become a tourist attraction, its upper chambers fitted with wooden walkways and gas lanterns that cast dancing shadows across formations with names like the Crystal Palace and the Temple of Silence. But beneath the show cave, beneath the carefully lit stalactites and the gift shop and the guided tours that run every 30 minutes during peak season, lies a labyrinth that has never been fully documented. The cave extends downward through at least 7 known levels, with passages that narrow to mere inches before opening into chambers large enough to hold a small church. Below the 3rd level, the limestone gives way to older rock, and the air grows cold in a way that seems disconnected from the mild Colorado climate above. The Colorado Geological Survey has mapped approximately 4.3 miles of passage within the Cave of the Wind system. Official documents suggest this represents 80 to 85% of the total cave. But survey records from the 1980s tell a different story, one that ends with a single, unexplained notation and a man who never spoke of caves again. Marcus Whitfield was 34 years old in the spring of 1987, a contract surveyor working for the United States Forest Service with 12 years of experience mapping underground systems throughout the American West. His personnel file, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2014, describes him as methodical, detail-oriented, and unusually comfortable in confined spaces. On April 7th of that year, Whitfield entered Cave of the Winds through a service access point on the cave's western edge, a narrow vertical shaft that bypassed the commercial entrance and led directly to the lower chambers. His assignment was routine: update elevation measurements in sections 4 through 6, which had last been surveyed in 1971. He signed in with park staff at 7:43 in the morning. His equipment log listed standard surveying tools, a primary headlamp with 2 backups, emergency rations sufficient for 48 hours, and 3 composition notebooks for field documentation. He estimated the survey would take 5 to 6 hours. Whitfield emerged at 1:52 in the afternoon, 6 hours and 9 minutes after entry, precisely within his projected time frame. The park ranger on duty, a seasonal employee named Theodore Baskin, noted nothing unusual in his exit report. Whitfield appeared tired but lucid, declined an offer of water, and drove away without filing his standard completion paperwork. It wasn't until 3 weeks later, when the Forest Service requested his field notes for data entry, that anyone noticed something was wrong. The first 2 notebooks contained exactly what the Forest Service expected: precise measurements, technical drawings, and systematic observations written in Whitfield's characteristically small, neat handwriting. Sections 4 and 5 were documented thoroughly, the data aligned with previous surveys. The 3rd notebook was different. Its first 11 pages continued the survey into Section 6, though the measurements became increasingly sparse and the handwriting grew less controlled. On page 12, Whitfield's documentation shifted abruptly. He began describing a passage that does not appear on any map of Cave of the Winds, a narrow horizontal crawl that he labeled Section 7 Access, with coordinates that place it somewhere beneath the canyon floor, roughly 200 feet below the lowest known chamber. His descriptions spanned 17 pages. The passage, according to his notes, opened into a series of connected rooms with smooth walls and an unusual acoustic quality he described as anti-echo, sound doesn't return. He documented formations that don't match any known speleothem type, using terms like columnar but organic and too regular for natural. The final entry, written on page 29, consists of 7 words in handwriting so controlled it appears almost mechanical. Do not return to section 7. The page is otherwise blank. The remaining pages of the notebook were never used. When Forest Service administrators contacted Whitfield for clarification, he responded through his attorney with a brief letter stating he would not discuss the survey and had no intention of returning to Cave of the Winds or any similar environment. He retired from surveying within the year. Renata Salazar was working as a cave resource specialist for the National Park Service in 1989 when she was asked to review Whitfield's notebooks as part of a routine records audit. Now retired and living in Durango, she agreed to discuss the documents on condition that her comments remain attributed only to a former NPS specialist, a condition she later waived in 2019. The first thing that struck me was the time, Salazar explained in a recorded interview. 17 pages of detailed documentation in Section 7, the measurements, the descriptions, the drawings. That's not 6 hours of work. That's a minimum of 12 to 15 hours, probably more. I've been in caves my whole career. You can't rush that kind of survey. She paused. But his exit time was verified, 6 hours and 9 minutes. When asked about the content of Section 7's documentation, Salazar became more guarded. The formations he described don't exist, not in Cave of the Winds, not anywhere I've seen in 30 years. He was either confused or fabricating, or he found something that isn't supposed to be there. Theodore Baskin, the ranger who logged Whitfield's exit, was interviewed by a local journalist in 2003. He remembered the surveyor as quiet and professional, nothing remarkable. But when pressed about Whitfield's condition upon exiting, Baskin's account shifted. His headlamp was dead, Baskin recalled, all 3 of them. He said they'd failed about an hour in, and he'd completed the survey using his backup flashlight. But here's the thing, his backup flashlight was still sealed in its packaging when he walked out. I saw it myself, still had the plastic wrap on the battery compartment. Baskin died in 2011. His family donated his papers to the Manitou Springs Historical Society, including a personal journal entry from April 1987 that read, "Surveyor came out wrong today. Couldn't say how. Just wrong." The Forest Service dispatched 3 follow-up surveys to locate Section 7 between 1988 and 1994. None found evidence of the passage Whitfield described. The first survey, conducted in November of 1988, focused on the coordinates Whitfield provided. The team reported solid limestone at the indicated location, with no evidence of recent geological activity or human modification. Their report concluded that Whitfield had likely experienced spatial disorientation and misrecorded his position. The second survey, in 1991, used ground-penetrating radar to scan below the lowest accessible chambers. The results showed nothing unusual, standard rock density consistent with the surrounding geology. However, a footnote in the technical appendix noted that anomalous signal absorption had occurred in one sector, causing a gap in the radar data approximately 40 feet in diameter. The footnote was not addressed in the report's conclusions. The third and final survey took place in 1994. It was cut short after 2 days when lead surveyor Monica Farlow reported equipment malfunctions in the lower sections. According to her incident report, 3 separate compasses gave 3 different readings in the same location, and her team's primary radio lost contact with surface support for approximately 90 minutes, despite being well within normal transmission range. Farlow's personal notes, later obtained through archival research, contained a single relevant observation. Whitfield wasn't lost. He was specific, too specific to be wrong. No further surveys of the lower chambers were conducted. In 1997, the Forest Service transferred oversight of Cave of the Winds to private management. Section 7 does not appear in any current documentation. A forensic document examiner analyzed Whitfield's notebooks in 2016 at the request of a documentary film team researching cave anomalies. Her findings were inconclusive but troubling. The ink consistency and pressure patterns throughout the Section 7 documentation indicated it had been written over an extended period, minimum 4 to 5 hours, possibly longer, with brief pauses that suggested the writer was stopping to observe rather than rest. More significantly, the final warning, "Do not return to Section 7, was written with a different pen. The ink matched a brand not manufactured until 1989, 2 years after the survey. Marcus Whitfield died in 2012 at his home in rural Montana. He had not entered a cave in 25 years. His family reported that he kept his surveying equipment in the garage, untouched, and that he refused to discuss his career even with his children. Among his possessions was a single photograph, undated, showing the entrance to what appears to be a narrow horizontal passage. The limestone walls are smooth in a way that looks almost polished. There is no location data, no identifying marks. On the back, in his familiar controlled handwriting, are 2 words: "It waits." Cave of the Winds still operates today, welcoming hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. The guided tours remain on the upper levels. The lower chambers are closed to the public. And somewhere in the archives of the United States Forest Service, a third notebook sits in a climate-controlled storage facility, its 17 impossible pages describing a place that 3 surveys could not find, documented in hours that do not fit, marked with a warning written in ink that did not yet exist. Some places refuse to be mapped, perhaps because they are not finished becoming. There are places where silence is not the absence of sound, but its opposite. Fulford Cave lies 11 miles east of Eagle, Colorado, carved into the sedimentary rock of the White River National Forest at an elevation of just over 10,000 feet. The entrance sits at the base of a limestone cliff in a narrow drainage called East Brush Creek, accessible only by a 4-mile hike through dense spruce forest and across terrain that remains snow-covered 8 months of the year. The cave was first documented in 1892 by a mining surveyor named Albert Fulford, who noted in his field journal that the entrance breathed cold air even in August, and that the passage extended farther than lamplight could reach. He did not venture past the first chamber. His notes suggest he had no intention of returning. By the 1930s, Fulford Cave had become a destination for experienced cavers, drawn by its challenging vertical drops and tight passages that required specialized equipment to navigate. The cave system extends approximately 3 miles horizontally and descends nearly 500 feet below the entrance, making it one of the deepest caves in Colorado. Its lowest sections flood during spring snowmelt, creating seasonal lakes in chambers that remain dry the rest of the year. The Forest Service installed a gate at the entrance in 1978 after 2 separate fatalities involving inexperienced explorers who became trapped in the narrowest sections. Access now requires a permit, and solo exploration is prohibited. Despite these restrictions, Fulford Cave draws several hundred permitted visitors each year, most of whom turn back well before the 3rd squeeze point. What lies beyond that point has been described in caving forums, incident reports, and private correspondence for decades. The descriptions vary in detail, but share one consistent element: the silence. The first formal account of the acoustic anomaly came from a caving expedition in September of 1983. A group of 4 experienced spelunkers from the Colorado Grotto, a chapter of the National Speleological Society, had obtained permits to survey the cave's lower passages, specifically a section beyond the 3rd squeeze point that had not been documented since 1961. The team leader, a geologist named Douglas Morrow, submitted a trip report that was filed with the grotto's archives but never published in their newsletter. The report described the passage beyond the third squeeze as acoustically dead in a way that defies explanation. Sound doesn't echo, Morrow wrote. It doesn't fade. It stops. I called out to Janet, who was 15 feet ahead of me, and my voice ended at my lips. She turned around because she saw my headlamp flicker, not because she heard anything. We tested it 3 times. Same result each time. Janet Okonkwo, the team member Morrow referenced, provided her own account in a letter to a colleague at the University of Colorado several months later. Her description was more visceral. It felt like being underwater without water. The pressure in my ears changed. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, but nothing external. Douglas was shouting. I could see his mouth moving, and there was nothing, not muffled, nothing. The team spent approximately 40 minutes beyond the squeeze point before retreating. Their survey was never completed. Morrow stopped caving within 2 years, citing unrelated health issues. Okonkwo continued exploring caves throughout the Southwest, but reportedly declined 3 subsequent invitations to return to Fulford. Anecdotal reports of the silence accumulated throughout the 1990s and 2000s. Caving forums archived at least 17 separate accounts from individuals who claimed to have experienced the phenomenon, though the details varied. Some described the effect as gradual, beginning roughly 200 feet past the squeeze point and intensifying with depth. Others insisted it was instantaneous, a threshold they crossed where sound simply ceased to exist. Ricardo Vasquez, a wildlife biologist who explored Fulford Cave in 2008 as part of a bat population study, described the experience in an interview conducted for a podcast on unusual natural phenomena. "I've been in anechoic chambers," Vasquez said. "You know, the rooms they used to test audio equipment, covered in foam pyramids to absorb all sound. This wasn't that. In an anechoic chamber, you can still hear yourself. Your voice just doesn't bounce back. In Fulford, past that squeeze, I couldn't hear myself. I hummed a note, felt my throat vibrate, and heard nothing. It was like my ears had been disconnected from my brain." He paused before adding, "The bats don't go past there. I found guano right up to a certain point, then nothing. They know something." A Forest Service ranger named Patricia Greenwood, stationed at the Eagle District Office from 2003 to 2015, acknowledged the reports in an informal conversation with a journalist in 2016. "We tell people it's just unusual acoustics," she said. "The shape of the passage, the rock composition, something about the way air moves. That's the official line. But I've talked to the serious cavers, the ones who've been all over the world. They say Fulford is different. They say the silence down there isn't natural." Greenwood declined to elaborate on what "not natural" meant. She retired the following year and did not respond to subsequent interview requests. In 2014, the University of Denver's Department of Physics approved a research proposal to study the acoustic properties of Fulford Cave. The project was led by Dr. Harrison Whitmore, a specialist in environmental acoustics who had previously studied sound propagation in mines and subway tunnels. The team consisted of 5 researchers: Whitmore, 2 graduate students named Samuel Otieno and Christina Farber, a sound engineer named Walter Kim, and an undergraduate research assistant named Elena Marchetti. They obtained Forest Service permits for 3 separate expeditions between May and August of that year. The first expedition, in May, focused on baseline measurements in the upper chambers. The data was unremarkable. Standard reverberation patterns consistent with limestone cave environments. The second expedition, in July, reached the 3rd squeeze point but did not proceed beyond it. Equipment logs indicate that 2 of the team's 4 microphones malfunctioned near the squeeze, producing readings that Whitmore later described as impossible in his handwritten notes. The microphones appeared to be registering sound at negative decibels, a measurement that should not exist, as 0 decibels represents the threshold of human hearing, not the absence of sound. The third expedition, in August, penetrated beyond the squeeze point. Only Whitmore, Kim, and Otieno made the passage. Farber and Marchetti remained at a staging area in the upper cave to monitor telemetry. The team spent approximately 90 minutes in the lower section. Their audio recordings from this period have never been released. However, a partial transcript of Whitmore's voice log, obtained through a source within the university's research archive, documents what occurred. 11:47 a.m. We are approximately 300 feet past the squeeze. Sound propagation has ceased entirely. I am speaking at normal volume. Walter is 6 feet away and cannot hear me. We are communicating via hand signals and written notes. A later entry reads, 12:03 p.m. We have deployed the resonance equipment. Initial readings are, I don't have terminology for this. The microphones are detecting what appears to be inverse waveforms. Sound is not being absorbed. It is being negated. Something is producing frequencies that cancel all other sound. But there is no source. The cave itself is generating anti-sound. The final recorded entry, time-stamped 12:21 p.m., consists of 7 words. Samuel wants to leave. So do I. The University of Denver research team returned from their third expedition on August 19, 2014. According to university records, they submitted a preliminary report to the physics department on September 3rd. The report has never been made public, and the university's research archive lists the project as discontinued, insufficient data for publication. 3 of the 5 team members, Otieno, Kim, and Marchetti, withdrew from the project within 6 weeks of the final expedition. Otieno transferred to a different doctoral program at a university in Canada. Kim left academia entirely and now works in commercial audio production in Los Angeles. Marchetti changed her major to literature and has declined all requests for comment. Dr. Whitmore remained at the University of Denver until 2018, when he accepted a position at a research institution in Switzerland. In his final year at Denver, he gave a single public lecture on cave acoustics that made no mention of Fulford. A graduate student who attended the lecture later reported that someone in the audience asked about the Negative Resonance Project, and Whitmore responded, "Some phenomena are not meant to be recorded." Christina Farber is the only team member who has discussed the project on record. In a 2020 interview with a science journalist, she offered a brief and carefully worded statement. "We found something we couldn't explain, not unusual acoustics, not equipment error. The cave was doing something to sound that shouldn't be physically possible, and the deeper we went, the worse it got. I stayed at the staging area, but I could see it on the monitors. The waveforms weren't just flat. They were inverted, like the cave was listening to us and responding, canceling us out." She paused. Harrison thought it might be geological, some kind of crystal structure or mineral deposit that produces counter frequencies, but we never found evidence of that. And honestly, I don't think any of us wanted to go back and look. Fulford Cave remains open to permitted exploration. The Forest Service documentation mentions nothing about acoustic anomalies, and the cave's official description emphasizes its geological significance and recreational value. The third squeeze point is noted as a technical challenge requiring experience and proper equipment. No formal research has been conducted in the lower sections since 2014. The University of Denver's equipment logs show that the microphones used on the final expedition were never recalibrated or reused. They remain in storage, labeled only with a project number that leads to a file marked incomplete. Cavers still visit Fulford. Some turn back at the squeeze point, citing difficulty or fatigue. Others press forward and return with stories they share only in private. Stories of a place where their voices disappeared, where their calls for help would have gone unheard, where something in the rock itself seemed determined to erase every sound they made. And in the deepest accessible chamber, 500 feet below the Colorado mountainside, the silence continues. Not empty, not quiet, active. She said the woman smiled like someone who had been waiting a very long time. Rocky Mountain National Park sprawls across 415 square miles of the Colorado Front Range, its eastern boundary less than 2 hours from Denver, and its western reaches extending into wilderness that remains largely untouched by human presence. Over 4 million visitors enter the park each year, most of them clustering around Bear Lake, Trail Ridge Road, and the well-maintained paths that wind through alpine meadows and past accessible peaks. But there are places within the park that see almost no foot traffic, remote drainages, and unnamed ridges where the trails end, and the terrain becomes something older, less accommodating. Long's Peak dominates the southern skyline at 14,259 feet, and its lower slopes contain geological features that have never been fully cataloged. Among them is a cave system known informally as Groaning Cave, named for the sound the wind makes when it passes over certain rock formations near its entrance. Groaning Cave does not appear on official park maps. Its existence is acknowledged in geological surveys dating to the 1940s, but the National Park Service has never developed it for public access. The entrance lies at approximately 11,800 feet in a boulder field on the north face of Mount Lady, Washington, reachable only by a steep off-trail scramble through loose scree and crumholz, the stunted, wind-twisted trees that mark the transition to alpine tundra. The cave system is small by Colorado standards, with only about 600 feet of documented passage, but its layout is unusual. The main entrance leads to a series of interconnected chambers that dead-end in multiple directions, and at least 2 additional openings have been identified at lower elevations. Openings that, according to survey records, have no physical connection to the primary system. In late September of 2019, a hiker emerged from one of those disconnected openings. She had no memory of how she got there. Marguerite Adebayo was 28 years old, a graduate student in environmental science at Colorado State University, and an experienced backcountry hiker who had logged over 300 miles in Rocky Mountain National Park since moving to Fort Collins in 2017. On September 21st, she set out alone for a day hike to Chasm Lake, a popular but strenuous route that begins at the Longs Peak trailhead. She signed the Wilderness Register at 6:14 in the morning, noting her destination and expected return time of 4 in the afternoon. The weather forecast called for clear skies with temperatures in the mid-50s, ideal conditions for a high-altitude hike. Adebayo did not return to the trailhead by 4. She did not return by nightfall. When she failed to answer calls or texts by 8 in the evening, her roommate contacted Park Dispatch. A search and rescue operation was initiated at first light on September 22nd. Searchers focused on the Chasm Lake Trail and the surrounding terrain, including the Mills Moraine and the boulder fields below the Diamond, the sheer east face of Longs Peak. By noon, they had found no sign of her. Dogs picked up her scent near Peacock Pool, approximately 2 miles from the trailhead, but lost it in the rocky terrain above. At 2:37 in the afternoon, a ranger named David Kowalczyk was conducting a sweep of a drainage northwest of the primary search area when he found Adebayo sitting on a flat rock approximately 50 yards from a small opening in the mountainside. She was conscious but disoriented, unable to state clearly where she had been or how long she had been there. The opening behind her led to a section of cave that had been surveyed only once, in 1963. It sits nearly a quarter mile from the main entrance to Groaning Cave, separated by solid granite, according to all available geological data. Adebayo was transported to Estes Park Medical Center, where she was treated for mild hypothermia and dehydration. Her physical condition was otherwise unremarkable. She had no significant injuries, and her clothing showed wear consistent with hiking, but not with any extended period underground. The initial interview was conducted by Ranger Kowalczyk and a Park Service investigator named Teresa Blackwood at approximately 6 in the evening on September 22nd. A partial transcript of that interview was later obtained through a public records request. Adebayo reported that she had left the Chasm Lake Trail sometime in the late morning to investigate what she thought was an unusual rock formation. She became disoriented in the boulder field and, while trying to regain her bearings, slipped into a narrow crevice that led to an underground chamber. "I couldn't find the way I came in," she said. "I tried for a while, maybe an hour, but every passage I followed dead-ended. My phone had no signal. My headlamp was starting to dim." When asked how she eventually found her way out, Adebayo's account became less precise. "There was a woman. She was just there, in one of the chambers. I didn't hear her approach. She was wearing old clothes, a long skirt, a wool coat, boots that looked handmade. I thought maybe she was part of some historical group, a reenactor or something. But she didn't speak. She just smiled at me and gestured for me to follow her." Adebayo described following the woman through a series of passages that didn't seem like the ones I'd already tried. The journey felt brief, perhaps 15 minutes, though she acknowledged she had lost track of time. The woman led her to an opening that led out onto the mountainside, then turned and walked back into the darkness without a word. "I called after her," Adebayo said. "I asked her name. She didn't answer. She just kept walking until I couldn't see her anymore." The Park Service treated Adebayo's account with professional skepticism. Disorientation and memory distortion are common in individuals who experience extended periods underground, particularly when combined with hypothermia and low-light conditions. The official incident report, filed on September 25th, attributed her experience to stress-induced perceptual anomalies and noted that no evidence of a second individual was found in or near the cave. But Ranger Blackwood, who had worked in Rocky Mountain National Park for over 2 decades, made a personal note in her field journal that was not included in the official report. "The opening where Kowalczyk found her doesn't connect to anything," Blackwood wrote. "I pulled the 63 survey myself. That section of cave is a dead end, 30 feet of passage that terminates in solid rock. No side branches, no crawlways, nothing. Either the survey was wrong, or she came out of a cave that doesn't go anywhere." 2 weeks after the incident, Blackwood visited Adebayo at her apartment in Fort Collins with a collection of historical photographs from the park's archive. She later described the visit in a letter to a colleague at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. "I showed her maybe 40 photographs, hikers, climbers, rangers, tourists, all from the 20s and 30s. I didn't tell her why. I just asked if any of them looked familiar." Adebayo identified one photograph immediately. The image showed a woman standing at the Longs Peak Inn, dated August 1931, wearing a long wool skirt and heavy boots. Her hair was pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and she was smiling at the camera with an expression that Blackwood described as patient, almost knowing. "That's her," Adebayo said. "That's the woman who helped me." The woman in the photograph was Harriet Ellsworth, a 34-year-old school teacher from Omaha, Nebraska, who visited Rocky Mountain National Park in the summer of 1931. According to park records, she was part of a small group that attempted a scramble route on Mount Lady, Washington on August 15th of that year. Somewhere above 11,000 feet, she became separated from her companions. A search was conducted over the following 3 days. Ellsworth was never found. The 1931 incident report, archived at the park's headquarters in Estes Park, notes that searchers explored all accessible terrain in the area where she was last seen, including several rock crevices and shallow caves. Her body was not recovered. The report concludes with a single sentence. It is presumed that Miss Ellsworth fell into an inaccessible location and could not be reached. No further searches were conducted. Her family erected a small memorial plaque near the Longs Peak trailhead in 1933, but it was removed during a renovation project in 1978 and never replaced. The drainage where Marguerite Adebayo was found lies within the same general area where Harriet Ellsworth disappeared 88 years earlier. Ranger Blackwood attempted to organize a follow-up survey of the cave section where Adebayo emerged. Her request was denied by Park Administration in October of 2019, citing resource limitations and lack of compelling justification. A subsequent request in early 2020 was postponed indefinitely due to the pandemic and was never rescheduled. Blackwood retired in 2022. In her final year, she made one unofficial visit to the site with a personal GPS unit and a camera. The cave opening was still there, barely visible among the boulders, roughly 18 inches wide and partially obscured by lichen-covered rock. She photographed the entrance but did not go inside. Her notes from that visit contain a single observation. Cold air moving outward, steady. The passage goes somewhere, regardless of what the survey says. Marguerite Adebayo completed her graduate degree in 2021 and now works for a conservation nonprofit in Montana. She agreed to a single follow-up interview in 2023, during which she was asked if she had reconsidered her account or developed any alternative explanation for what happened. "I know what people think," she said. "Hypothermia, hallucination, stress. Maybe they're right. But I remember her face. I remember the way she moved, like she knew exactly where she was going, like she'd walked that path 1,000 times. And when I looked at that photograph, I didn't hesitate. I knew it was her before I even processed what I was seeing." She paused. "I think about it sometimes, whether she's still down there, whether she's waiting for the next person who gets lost." The Geological Survey of Groening Cave has never been updated. The 1963 documentation remains the only official record of the system's layout, and it continues to show no connection between the main entrance and the lower opening where Adebayo emerged. Hikers occasionally report hearing sounds near the boulder field on Mount Lady Washington, a low, rhythmic groaning that rises and falls with the wind. Most attribute it to natural acoustics, the movement of air through rock. A few have mentioned something else, a faint noise beneath the groaning, almost like humming, as if someone were singing a song too quiet to identify. Harriet Ellsworth's body has never been recovered. No memorial marks the place where she was last seen. The only evidence that she existed at all is a photograph in an archive, a woman in old clothes smiling at a camera, preserved in silver and paper, while the mountain keeps whatever remains of her hidden in the dark. And somewhere on that same mountain, a passage that shouldn't exist continues to breathe cold air into the Colorado afternoon, waiting for the next person who loses their way. The mountain breathes. The workers learn to count. The town of Marble, Colorado, sits at an elevation of 7,950 feet in the Crystal River Valley, surrounded by peaks that rise another 6,000 feet above its single paved road. Fewer than 200 people live there year-round, most of them drawn by the solitude and the strange beauty of a place that winter isolates for months at a time. But Marble was not always quiet. For 3 decades in the early 20th century, it was home to one of the most ambitious mining operations in American history. An effort to extract pure white stone from the heart of Treasure Mountain and ship it across the country to build monuments that would last for centuries. The Yule Marble Quarry began operations in 1885, though large-scale extraction didn't commence until 1905, when the Colorado Yule Marble Company invested millions in infrastructure, rail lines, finishing mills, steam-powered cutting equipment, and an underground network of tunnels that penetrated deep into the mountainside. The marble they pulled from those tunnels was among the finest in the world, luminous, fine-grained, capable of holding detail that other stones could not match. The quarry's marble built the Lincoln Memorial. It clad the tomb of the unknown soldier. It formed the columns of banks and courthouses and monuments in nearly every major American city. But the operation was troubled from the beginning. Avalanches destroyed equipment. Financial difficulties plagued the company. Workers reported accidents at rates that exceeded comparable mining operations. And in the deeper tunnels, the ones that pushed farthest into Treasure Mountain, the men who worked there began to speak of something they could not explain. They called it the breathing. The first documented reference to the phenomenon appears in a letter written by a quarry worker named Enzo Benedetti in March of 1913. Benedetti, a stonemason from Carrara, Italy, had emigrated to Colorado in 1909 to work in an industry he knew well. His letter, addressed to his brother in Tuscany, was preserved in a family archive and later donated to the Colorado Historical Society. "The mountain makes a sound," Benedetti wrote, "not the sound of machines or men, a sound like breath. In and out, always the same, never stopping. The old-timers say it has always been this way. They count the seconds between. 47, always 47. Benedetti worked in the quarry until 1916, when he returned to Italy to fight in the First World War. He never came back to Colorado, but his letter was not unique. At least 7 other accounts from the same period reference unusual sounds or pressure changes in the lower tunnels, though none are as specific as Benedetti's description. The quarry changed hands multiple times throughout the 20th century, closing and reopening as market conditions shifted. Full-scale operations ceased in 1941 due to wartime material shortages, and the facility sat largely dormant until a limited revival in the 1990s. By then, most of the original tunnel system had been sealed or flooded, accessible only to geologists and the occasional historian. But the breathing continued. Dr. Franklin Osei was a geophysicist at the Colorado School of Mines who specialized in subsurface pressure dynamics. In the summer of 1974, he led a small team into the lower tunnels of the Yule Marble Quarry to investigate reports of unusual barometric readings that had been flagged by a mining consultant evaluating the site for potential reopening. Osei's team spent 3 days in the tunnels, deploying sensitive pressure monitors at multiple depths. His preliminary findings, submitted to the mining consultant in August of that year, have never been published, but were referenced in a 1992 academic paper on anomalous geological phenomena. "We recorded a rhythmic pressure oscillation throughout the lower tunnel system," Osei wrote. "The cycle was remarkably consistent, 47 seconds from peak to peak, with a variance of less than 0.3 seconds over 72 hours of continuous monitoring. The pressure differential was subtle but measurable, approximately 0.4 millibars per cycle." Osei's report noted that such oscillations typically indicate one of 3 causes: underground water movement, seismic microactivity, or atmospheric pressure changes transmitted through connected cave systems. His team found no evidence of any of these. "There is no aquifer at this depth that could produce such a regular cycle," he wrote. Seismic monitoring showed no corresponding ground movement, and the tunnel system is effectively sealed. There is no atmospheric connection to the surface that would allow external pressure changes to propagate. We could not identify a source for the oscillation. The report concluded with a recommendation for further study. No follow-up investigation was ever conducted. The mining consultant who commissioned the survey declined to proceed with the reopening, citing unfavorable geological conditions. In 1978, the Yule Marble Quarry was briefly reactivated for a limited extraction project under contract with the federal government. The Lincoln Memorial required restoration work, and officials wanted stone from the same source that had built the original structure. A crew of 14 men worked the upper tunnels from April through October of that year, overseen by a foreman named Harold Lindqvist. Lindqvist had worked in marble quarries in Vermont for 20 years before taking the Colorado assignment. His personal journals, discovered by his grandson in 2016 and subsequently shared with researchers, provide the most detailed account of the breathing phenomenon ever recorded. "The men talk about the breathing like it's part of the job," Lindqvist wrote in an entry dated May 15th. "They don't seem afraid of it. They count along with it sometimes like a game, 47 seconds in, 47 seconds out." Peterson says his father worked here in the 30s, and it was the same then, always 47. Lindqvist's entries from the following months are mostly mundane: equipment inventories, weather reports, production figures. But in late September, the tone changed. September 23rd, the breathing stopped. I noticed it this morning when I entered the lower access tunnel. The pressure felt different, flat, stable, wrong. I asked Doherty if he noticed anything. He went pale, said he'd never known it to stop, not once in 3 generations of men working this mountain. The breathing remained absent for 3 days. Lindqvist documented the workers' increasing unease, the way they moved through the tunnels more quickly, the conversations that stopped when he approached. On September 26th, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, a cable on the primary hoist system snapped. A loaded stone cart broke free and struck a support beam, bringing down a section of the access tunnel. A worker named Raymond Coolidge was killed instantly. Lindqvist's entry from that evening contains only 2 sentences. "The breathing started again. I checked my watch. 47 seconds after dispatch radioed the accident report to base camp." The 1978 incident was ruled an equipment failure. The official investigation found that the hoist cable had been improperly maintained and cited corrosion as the primary cause. Lindqvist submitted his own report to the project supervisor, including his observations about the breathing, but this report does not appear in the archived records of the restoration project. Lindqvist left Colorado in November of 1978 and never returned to quarry work. His grandson, Eric Lindqvist, described him as a practical man who didn't believe in ghost stories. But according to Eric, Harold kept a small piece of Yule marble on his desk for the rest of his life and would occasionally pick it up and hold it to his ear, as though listening for something. "I asked him once what he was doing," Eric said in a 2018 interview. "He just shook his head and said, 'Counting.' That's all he would say." Other workers from the 1978 crew have been harder to locate. Parish records indicate that at least 4 of them had died by 2010. One, a man named Thomas Mbiewe, who worked as a machine operator, responded to a letter from a documentary researcher in 2012 with a brief handwritten note. "I remember the breathing," Mbiewe wrote. "I remember when it stopped. I remember Coolidge. I don't talk about marble, and I don't want to remember it. Please don't write to me again." The Yule Marble Quarry remains partially operational today, producing small quantities of stone for specialty architectural projects. The lower tunnels, the sections where the breathing was most consistently reported, have been sealed since 1983, officially due to structural concerns. A geological survey conducted in 2004 as part of an environmental assessment found no anomalies in the sealed sections. The survey team used ground-penetrating radar and acoustic monitoring to map the underground chambers without physical entry. Their report makes no mention of pressure oscillations, though a footnote acknowledges that certain acoustic readings were inconsistent with expected values and attributes this to equipment calibration issues. Dr. Osei's 1974 pressure readings have never been replicated or explained. The instruments he used were standard for the era, and his methodology was sound. The 47-second cycle he documented matches the oral tradition preserved by quarry workers dating back to at least 1913, a span of over 60 years with no variation. No one has entered the lower tunnels since 1983. The seals are concrete, 3 feet thick, poured in place by a construction crew that completed the job in a single weekend. One member of that crew, a concrete finisher named Angela Reyes, gave a brief statement to a local newspaper reporter in 1995. "We worked fast," she said, "faster than we needed to. Nobody said why, but I could feel it through the forms while the concrete was setting, in and out, like the mountain was trying to push back against what we were doing." She paused. "I counted once, 47 seconds. Then I stopped counting and didn't start again." The marble that built the Lincoln Memorial still stands in Washington, D.C., visited by millions each year. The stone is cool to the touch, even in summer, luminous in a way that seems to hold light rather than reflect it. Restoration work in 2016 used marble from a different source. The Yule Quarry could not supply sufficient quantity, but the original blocks remain, cut from deep inside Treasure Mountain over a century ago. Somewhere beneath that mountain, behind 3 feet of concrete and decades of silence, the tunnels remain. The old workers are nearly all gone now. The stories they told have become footnotes in geological surveys and letters in family archives. But the mountain has not changed. The marble still runs deep into its heart, white and cold and impossibly pure. And if anyone were to unseal those tunnels, to descend into the darkness with instruments sensitive enough to measure what the air is doing, they might find that the breathing never stopped. 47 seconds, in and out, in and out. The mountain keeps its own time. The camera saw what they could not. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise along the eastern edge of the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, a range of jagged peaks that the Spanish named Blood of Christ for the way the setting sun turns their snow fields red. The mountains are old, older than the Rockies to the north, and their lower slopes are riddled with caves formed by water-dissolving limestone over millions of years. Spanish Cave lies at approximately 10,200 feet on the western face of Mount Blanca, the 4th highest peak in Colorado, and a site of profound spiritual significance to the Navajo, who consider it one of the 4 sacred mountains marking the boundaries of their traditional homeland. The cave entrance is difficult to reach, requiring a steep scramble through loose talus and dense scrub oak, and the passage beyond is narrow enough that most explorers must remove their packs to squeeze through. The cave was first documented by a mining survey in 1891, though local ranchers and indigenous peoples almost certainly knew of its existence long before. Early descriptions mention a main passage approximately 400 feet long, terminating in a chamber roughly 30 feet in diameter with a ceiling that rises to a natural dome. This terminal chamber was given various names over the years: the sanctuary, the round room, the chapel, but most modern cavers simply call it the back chamber. It is this chamber that appears in the photographs. The earliest known photograph of the back chamber was taken in August of 1965 by a caving club from the University of Colorado. The group consisted of 6 students and 1 faculty advisor, Dr. Leonard Haugen, a professor of geology who had explored caves throughout the American Southwest. They spent approximately 4 hours in Spanish Cave, documenting formations and collecting samples for analysis. Haugen used a Rolleiflex twin-lens reflex camera loaded with Kodak Tri-X film, a standard combination for underground photography at the time. He took 14 photographs during the expedition, 12 of which developed normally. The final 2, both taken in the back chamber, did not. The photographs show the chamber as expected: the domed ceiling, the smooth walls, the rubble floor. The exposure is correct. The focus is sharp. But in the far corner of both images, approximately 20 feet from the camera, stands a dark figure. The shape is roughly human in proportion, slightly taller than average, with no discernible features. It appears to be facing the camera. Haugen noted the anomaly in his expedition log, but attributed it to a development error or light leak. He did not mention it to his students. The photographs were filed with the university's caving club records, where they remained undisturbed for nearly a decade. In 1971, a separate team from the Colorado Grotto photographed the same chamber using different equipment, a Nikon F with Ilford HP4 film. Their photographs also showed a figure in the corner, same position, same proportions, same featureless darkness. The team leader, a construction engineer named Wallace Trujillo, was troubled enough to contact Haugen, whose 1965 expedition was referenced in the Grotto's files. When Haugen shared his own photographs, Trujillo noted that the figures appeared identical, not similar, but identical, down to the angle of what might have been shoulders and the slight forward lean of the shape. "It's not a shadow," Trujillo wrote in a letter to a colleague. "I've examined the negatives. There's no corresponding object that could cast that shape, and it doesn't match the chamber's geometry. Whatever it is, it's standing there, just standing." Over the next 11 years, 5 additional expeditions photographed the back chamber of Spanish Cave. The teams used different cameras, different film stocks, different lighting setups. 3 of the expeditions were aware of the previous anomalies. 2 were not. The results were consistent. Every photograph from the back chamber showed the figure. Dr. Patricia Nakamura was a professor of photography at Adams State College in Alamosa who specialized in the chemistry of film development. In 1979, she was contacted by a member of the Colorado Grotto who had heard about the Spanish cave photographs and wondered if there might be a technical explanation. Nakamura examined negatives from 4 of the 7 expeditions. The others were unavailable or had been lost, and conducted a detailed analysis that she summarized in a report never intended for publication. A copy of this report was later found in her personal papers, donated to the college after her death in 2008. "The anomaly is present on the negative itself," Nakamura wrote. "It is not a development artifact or a printing error. Something was recorded by the film at the moment of exposure. The figure appears to be approximately 6 feet tall, based on the chamber's known dimensions, and occupies the same relative position in every image examined, regardless of the photographer's vantage point." Nakamura attempted to photograph the chamber herself in October of 1979. She used 2 cameras simultaneously, one loaded with color slide film, one with black and white negative film, and took exposures from multiple angles. Both sets of photographs showed the figure. The color slides revealed an additional detail. The shadow was not uniform black, but appeared to have a faint reddish tint, barely visible at the edges. Nakamura's report included a single personal observation. "I spent approximately 40 minutes in the back chamber. I was alone for roughly 10 of those minutes while my assistant retrieved additional equipment. I saw nothing. The chamber felt empty. But the photographs say otherwise, and the photographs do not lie." The final documented expedition to photograph the back chamber took place in July of 1982. The team was organized by a freelance writer named Raymond Delacroix, who was researching an article on Colorado's unusual caves for a regional outdoor magazine. Delacroix had heard rumors about the Spanish cave photographs and was skeptical. He assembled a group that included a professional photographer named Susan Mwangi, a geologist from Fort Lewis College named Dr. Henry Bauer, and 2 experienced cavers from the New Mexico Grotto. Mwangi brought 3 cameras, a Hasselblad medium format, a Canon A 135mm, and a Polaroid SX70 for instant results. Her plan was to expose the same scene with all 3 systems simultaneously, eliminating any possibility of equipment-specific error. The team reached the back chamber at approximately 2 in the afternoon. Mwangi set up her equipment while the others explored the perimeter of the chamber, noting formations and taking measurements. There was nothing unusual about the space, Bauer later wrote in a letter to a colleague. Good air circulation, typical limestone formations, no evidence of habitation, animal or human. It felt like 100 other caves I've been in. Mwangi took 12 photographs with the Hasselblad, 8 with the Canon, and 6 Polaroids. The Polaroids developed on site. Delacroix described what happened next in notes that were never published. Susan pulled the first Polaroid from the camera, and we watched it develop under our headlamps. The chamber appeared first, gray and grainy. Then the figure, in the corner, standing exactly where the old photograph said it would be. Susan dropped the picture. I don't think any of us said a word for at least a minute. The remaining Polaroids showed the same thing. When the Hasselblad and Canon negatives were developed the following week, the figure appeared in every frame. The National Speleological Society maintained a list of recommended caves for recreational exploration, updated annually based on access conditions, safety considerations, and geological interest. Spanish Cave had appeared on this list since 1958. In the spring of 1983, Spanish Cave was removed without explanation. The Society's records from this period are incomplete. Meeting minutes from the relevant committee sessions reference concerns raised by member expeditions, but provide no details. A letter from the Society's executive director to the Colorado Grotto, dated April of 1983, thanks them for bringing the matter to our attention, and notes that the cave will not be included in future publications pending further assessment. No further assessment was ever conducted. Spanish Cave has never been restored to the recommended list. Dr. Henry Bauer, the geologist who participated in the 1982 expedition, attempted to organize a follow-up investigation in 1985. His proposal, submitted to both the National Speleological Society and the University of Colorado's Geology Department, was declined by both institutions. The Society's rejection letter cited resource limitations. The university's response has not been preserved. Bauer retired from academic work in 1994 and died in 2011. His papers, archived at Fort Lewis College, include a folder labeled Spanish Cave, Unresolved, containing copies of 6 photographs from various expeditions. Each shows the figure in the corner. A handwritten note clipped to the folder reads, "What does film see that we can't? And why only here?" Susan Mwangi continued working as a professional photographer until 2003, when she transitioned to teaching at a community college in Albuquerque. She agreed to a single interview about the Spanish Cave photographs in 2015, conducted by a graduate student researching paranormal claims in the American Southwest. "I've spent my entire career understanding how cameras work," Mwangi said. "Light hits film. Chemical reactions preserve the image. It's physics. It's chemistry. There's no room for mystery." She paused. "But those photographs are real. I processed them myself. I know what I saw on those negatives. Something was in that chamber with us, something that didn't reflect enough light for our eyes to detect, but left an impression on the film. I don't know what that means. I've never known what it means." When asked if she would return to Spanish Cave given the opportunity, Mwangi's response was immediate. "No, I don't photograph things I can't see. That's the one rule I've never broken since." Spanish Cave remains accessible to those willing to make the difficult approach. The trail is unmarked, the entrance unguarded. No permits are required. The Forest Service maintains no official record of visitation, and the cave does not appear in most recreational guides. The back chamber is still there, unchanged by the decades. The dome ceiling, the smooth walls, the corner where something stood or stands, in 17 photographs taken by 7 different teams over 17 years. No one has photographed the chamber since 1982, or if they have, they have not shared the results. The film stocks used in those expeditions are largely obsolete now, replaced by digital sensors that record light in entirely different ways. Perhaps a modern camera would capture nothing unusual. Perhaps the figure was an artifact of silver halide chemistry, a ghost in the emulsion that digital technology cannot see. Or perhaps it is still there, in the corner, waiting for someone to point a camera in its direction, patient, silent, watching. He went in for 2 hours. He came out a day and a half later. He doesn't know where the time went. Fairy Cave sits tucked into a limestone bluff above the Roaring Fork River, approximately 8 miles south of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. The entrance is modest, a horizontal slot perhaps 3 feet high and 5 feet wide, partially concealed by scrub oak and serviceberry bushes that make it nearly invisible from the valley floor. Without precise coordinates, most hikers walk past it without a second glance. The cave was discovered in 1886 by a rancher chasing a stray calf, though the exact circumstances of that discovery have been embellished so many times in local retellings that the original account is impossible to verify. What is certain is that by 1900, Fairy Cave had earned a reputation among regional cavers as a manageable but rewarding system, approximately 2,000 feet of surveyed passage, mostly horizontal, with a few vertical drops that required basic rope work. The name derives from an early explorer's description of the formations in the cave's middle section. Delicate soda straw stalactites, some barely thicker than a pencil, that seemed to glow when lamplight caught them at certain angles. Like something fairies might build, the explorer reportedly said. The name stuck, even as later generations found it overly whimsical for what is, in most respects, an unremarkable Colorado cave. Unremarkable, except for what happened in October of 2003. Martin Aldridge was 36 years old, an electrical engineer from Grand Junction who had been caving recreationally for just over a decade. His experience was solid but not exceptional. He had explored perhaps 40 caves throughout Colorado and Utah, mostly with organized groups, occasionally solo when his schedule didn't align with his caving partners. Fairy Cave was familiar territory. Aldridge had visited it 3 times previously, most recently in the spring of 2002. He knew its layout, its quirks, the places where the passage narrowed, and the chambers where a person could stand upright. It was, by his own description in a Caving Forum post from 2001, a good cave for a quiet afternoon. On October 11, 2003, Aldridge drove to the trailhead alone. The weather was clear and cool, typical for early autumn in the Roaring Fork Valley. He signed the informal register that cavers maintained near the entrance, a weatherproof notebook in a plastic container, noting his name, entry time of 11:22 in the morning, expected duration of 2 hours, and emergency contact information. He carried standard equipment, helmet with mounted LED headlamp, 2 backup light sources, a small pack with water and energy bars, a compass, a basic first aid kit, and a field notebook for sketching formations. His watch was a digital Casio, battery-operated, nothing unusual. At 6:15 that evening, when Aldridge had not returned to his vehicle, a passing hiker noticed the car still parked at the trailhead and checked the register. Seeing the expected return time of approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, he contacted the Garfield County Sheriff's Office. A search team entered Fairy Cave at 8:47 that night. The initial search found no sign of Aldridge. The team swept the main passage, checked the known side chambers, called his name at regular intervals. The cave was empty. They expanded the search the following morning, bringing in additional personnel and checking passages that required technical climbing to access. At 6:53 in the evening on October 12th, 31 hours and 31 minutes after Aldridge signed the entry register, a searcher named Corinne Fitzgerald discovered him sitting cross-legged in a small alcove approximately 50 feet from the main entrance, an alcove the search team had passed at least 4 times in the preceding 22 hours. He was just sitting there, Fitzgerald later told investigators, eyes open, breathing normally like he was meditating or something. I said his name, and he looked at me like I'd woken him up from a nap, asked what time it was. When I told him, he didn't believe me. Aldridge was alert and oriented. He knew his name, the date he had entered the cave, and the reason for his visit. His physical condition was unremarkable. No injuries, no signs of hypothermia or dehydration, no indication of distress. His clothing was dusty, but not excessively so. His equipment was intact, but he had no memory of the preceding 31 hours. The Garfield County Sheriff's Office conducted a standard interview with Aldridge at Glenwood Springs Hospital, where he was taken for observation, despite appearing physically healthy. Deputy Marcus Oyalaran documented the conversation in a report that was later obtained through a public records request. Aldridge stated that he had entered the cave at approximately 11:25, proceeded through the main passage, and spent perhaps 30 minutes examining formations in the middle section. He then decided to explore a side passage he didn't remember from previous visits, a narrow crawlway that branched off to the left approximately 600 feet from the entrance. I followed it for maybe 50 feet, Aldridge told Oyalaran. It opened up into a chamber I'd never seen before. I sat down to sketch it, and then I was sitting near the entrance and someone was saying my name. He could not account for the time between. He described no dreams, no visions, no sense of the hours passing. It was, in his words, like someone cut out the middle of a tape and spliced the ends together. His watch had stopped at 2:47 in the afternoon. The battery was not dead. When Aldridge pressed a button, the display illuminated normally. The watch simply was not running. A jeweler in Grand Junction later examined it and found no mechanical explanation for the stoppage. When he replaced the battery as a precaution, the watch resumed normal function and never malfunctioned again. The most troubling evidence was in Aldridge's field notebook. The first 3 pages contained sketches consistent with his stated plan, formation studies from the main passage, measurements of a particularly large stalagmite, notes on airflow direction, standard documentation from an experienced amateur caver. Pages 4 through 11 were different. They contained detailed drawings of chambers that do not exist in Fairy Cave, or, more precisely, chambers that do not exist in any surveyed section of Fairy Cave. The sketches depicted large spaces. One labeled Cathedral Room appeared to show a chamber at least 80 feet in diameter with a ceiling height Aldridge estimated at 45 feet. Another showed a passage that descended steeply through what Aldridge annotated as carved steps, not natural. A third depicted a wall covered in markings that Aldridge had attempted to reproduce, a series of intersecting curves and angles that resembled no known petroglyph style. The drawings were precise, methodical, consistent with Aldridge's drafting background. They included measurements, orientation notes, and observations about temperature and humidity. They were, in every respect, the work of someone documenting real spaces. But Fairy Cave contains no chamber larger than 30 feet in diameter. Its maximum depth is approximately 120 feet below the entrance, reached through a series of natural drops, not carved steps, and no markings of any kind have ever been documented on its walls. Aldridge submitted to a voluntary medical examination 3 days after his emergence. The results were unremarkable. No neurological abnormalities, no signs of head trauma, no indication of substance use. A psychologist who interviewed him at the request of the sheriff's office found him cooperative, coherent, and genuinely distressed by his inability to explain the experience. "He's not fabricating," the psychologist wrote in her assessment. "His confusion is authentic. He experienced something he cannot account for, and the uncertainty is causing him significant anxiety." Aldridge attempted to return to Fairy Cave in November of 2003, accompanied by 2 members of the Colorado Grotto who had heard about the incident. Their goal was to locate the side passage he had described, the narrow crawlway that supposedly led to the undocumented chambers. They could not find it. The team spent 6 hours systematically examining every potential branch point in the main passage. They found no crawlway matching Aldridge's description, no evidence of recent passage through any of the tighter sections, no indication that anyone had deviated from the established route. One of the grotto members, a surveyor named Jackson Okafor, documented the search in a trip report that circulated among Colorado caving communities. Martin was certain about the location, Okafor wrote. He walked us directly to a section of wall approximately 600 feet from the entrance. He said the crawlway opened right there, at floor level. But there was nothing. Solid limestone. No cracks, no seams, no indication that a passage had ever existed in that location. Aldridge touched the wall, Okafor noted, ran his hands across the stone, said nothing for several minutes. Then he turned and walked out of the cave without a word. The matter of the emergency rations was never officially investigated, but it was noted in multiple accounts of the incident. Aldridge had carried sufficient food and water for a 2-day emergency, 4 energy bars, 2 liters of water, a bag of trail mix. When his pack was inventoried after his rescue, everything was accounted for. The energy bars were unopened, the water bottles were full, the trail mix was untouched. He had been in the cave for 31 hours. He should have been ravenously hungry, severely dehydrated. The human body cannot go that long without water under the mild physical stress of caving without showing symptoms. Aldridge showed none. The hospital records note that his blood chemistry was normal, his electrolyte levels balanced, his hydration adequate. He was, by every measurable standard, a man who had eaten and drunk recently. But the rations told a different story, or rather, they told no story at all. Martin Aldridge continued caving for another 4 years after the incident, though he never returned to Fairy Cave. Friends described him as quieter than before, more methodical in his documentation, reluctant to explore solo. He moved to New Mexico in 2008 for a job opportunity and largely withdrew from the Colorado caving community. He agreed to one interview about the experience, conducted via email in 2012 by a researcher compiling accounts of unusual caving incidents. His responses were brief but revealing. "I've stopped trying to explain it," he wrote. "I was somewhere for 31 hours. I documented it. The sketches are real. I drew them. I remember the pencil in my hand. But I don't remember the places. The chambers he sketched have never been located. And the 8 pages of detailed drawings in his field notebook remain in his possession, documentation of places that exist only on paper." The Casio watch sits in a drawer in his home in Santa Fe. It runs perfectly. It has never stopped again. And somewhere in the limestone bluff above the Roaring Fork River, the cave keeps its own records in a language that maps and sketches cannot capture of the hours it borrows from those who enter. 31 of them in Martin Aldridge's case, perhaps more from others who never thought to count. 1, 2, 3. The counting never reaches 13. Rifle Falls State Park lies 3 miles north of the town of Rifle in western Colorado, a small preserve centered on a triple waterfall that drops 70 feet over a moss-covered limestone cliff. The falls are fed by East Rifle Creek, which emerges from springs higher in the drainage and has carved this landscape for thousands of years. In winter, the falls freeze into massive ice columns. In summer, the mist creates a pocket of green in an otherwise arid valley. But the falls are not the park's only attraction. Behind the curtain of water, accessible by a short trail that switchbacks up the cliff face, lies a series of limestone caves formed by the same geological processes that created the waterfall itself. The caves are modest. The largest chamber extends perhaps 60 feet into the rock, but they draw steady visitors, particularly families with children who delight in the novelty of walking behind a waterfall. The caves have no formal names. Park literature refers to them simply as the Limestone Caves or the Falls Caves. They are not gated, not restricted, not considered dangerous in any meaningful way. A person can walk into them on any summer afternoon and stand in the cool darkness while the waterfall roars a few feet away. Most visitors stay only a few minutes. The caves are damp, the footing uneven, and there is little to see beyond the first chamber. But those who venture deeper, past the main tourist area, into the narrower passages that twist away from the falls, sometimes hear something they cannot explain: the sound of children counting. The earliest documented account of the phenomenon comes from a park ranger named Beverly Stonecrow, who worked at Rifle Falls from 1994 to 2009. In a 2015 interview with a regional folklore researcher, Stonecrow described an experience from her first summer at the park. "I was doing a routine check of the caves, late afternoon, maybe 5 o'clock," she said. "The park was quiet, a Tuesday, I think, not many visitors. I went deeper than I usually did, past the point where the passage narrows, and I heard it. Children's voices, counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 12. Then silence. Then it started again." Stonecrow assumed children had wandered into the cave without her noticing. She called out, identified herself as a ranger, asked them to come toward her voice. The counting stopped. No one emerged. "I searched for 20 minutes, she said. "The passage dead ends maybe 100 feet in. There's nowhere to hide. No children, no footprints in the mud, nothing." She reported the incident to her supervisor, who noted it in the daily log as a possible auditory anomaly. Investigate. No investigation was conducted. Stonecrow heard the counting twice more during her 15 years at the park, always in the same location, always the same sequence, always stopping at 12. The phenomenon might have remained a curiosity, one ranger's odd experience filed away and forgotten, if not for what happened in August of 2007. A film student from Mesa State College named Derek Okonkwo was shooting footage for a documentary about Colorado's lesser-known natural attractions. He had obtained permission to film inside the caves during off hours, when visitor traffic was minimal. His equipment included a digital video camera with an external shotgun microphone designed for capturing ambient sound. Okonkwo spent approximately 2 hours in the caves on the evening of August 14th. He later described the experience as uneventful. Good footage, interesting acoustics, nothing unusual. It was only when he reviewed the audio in his editing suite that he noticed the anomaly. At the 47-minute mark of his recording, captured while his camera was pointed at a rock formation in the deepest accessible section of the cave, voices become audible on the audio track. Children's voices, faint but distinct, counting in English, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then silence. Then the sequence begins again. The counting continues for approximately 3 minutes before fading into the ambient sound of dripping water. Okonkwo was alone in the cave. His footage confirms this. The camera pans the chamber multiple times, showing empty passages and bare stone. Okonkwo submitted the audio to his faculty advisor, Dr. Ramona Espinosa, who specialized in acoustic analysis. Her examination, documented in a memo that Okonkwo later shared with researchers, reached an unusual conclusion. The audio characteristics are inconsistent with a point source, Espinosa wrote. Standard analysis assumes sound originates from a specific location and propagates outward. This recording shows no clear origin point. The waveform suggests the sound is emerging from multiple locations simultaneously or from no fixed location at all. I have no technical explanation for this. 2 additional recordings of the counting have been made since 2007, both by individuals who had heard about Okonkwo's footage and sought to capture the phenomenon themselves. In June of 2012, a sound engineer named Marcus Lindberg spent 3 nights in the caves with professional recording equipment. He captured nothing on the first 2 nights. On the third night, at approximately 2:15 in the morning, his equipment recorded 11 seconds of children counting from 1 to 12. The audio quality was poor. Lindberg's equipment was designed for music recording, not field work, but the sequence was unmistakable. Lindberg's analysis, posted to an audio engineering forum, noted the same anomaly Espinosa had identified. No directional data. The sound has no origin. It's as if the cave walls are producing it. The third recording was made in 2018 by a paranormal investigation group from Denver. Their footage has not been made publicly available, but a member of the group, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that they captured approximately 90 seconds of continuous counting. It just kept going, she said. 1 to 12, pause, 1 to 12, pause, over and over. We were all accounted for. 5 adults, no children. The cave was empty except for us. She added one detail that had not appeared in previous accounts. Near the end, the voices started overlapping, like there was more than one group counting, not in unison, staggered, like rounds. It was the most unsettling thing I've ever heard. The Ute people have lived in the region, now known as Western Colorado, for at least 1,000 years, and their oral traditions contain references to the caves and springs throughout the Rifle Creek drainage. In 2010, an anthropologist named Dr. Catherine Whitehorse, herself of Lakota descent, conducted a series of interviews with Ute elders as part of a broader study of indigenous place names and their meanings. One elder, a man in his 80s whom Whitehorse identified only as Mr. J, per his request, mentioned the Falls Caves in the context of a discussion about places that were considered spiritually significant. There are places where the water speaks, Mr. J said, according to Whitehorse's transcription, and places where something else speaks through the water. The caves behind the falling water. The children play there. Our children knew not to play with them, not to count with them. When Whitehorse asked for clarification, Mr. J described a game. The ones in the wet stone, they count. They want you to count with them. If you count to 12, you are playing their game. If you count past 12, you're playing a different game. Our grandmothers told us, never count past 12 in that place. Whitehorse pressed for more detail. Who were the ones in the wet stone? What happened if someone counted past 12? Why the number 12 was significant? Mr. J declined to answer. Some things are not stories, he said. Some things are warnings. The warnings are enough. Whitehorse contacted 3 other Ute elders with knowledge of the Rifle Creek area. All acknowledged awareness of traditions relating to the caves. None would elaborate beyond what Mr. J had shared. A woman in her 70s offered a single additional observation. The children who count there are not our children. They are not anyone's children. They are older than children. The Park Service has received 17 formal complaints about the phenomenon since 2007, ranging from visitors who found the experience disturbing to parents concerned that their children had heard voices in the caves. The standard response, developed by Park Administration in 2011, attributes the sounds to acoustic effects caused by water movement and cave geometry. A park naturalist named Eduardo Reyes, who worked at Rifle Falls from 2014 to 2020, expressed private skepticism about this explanation in correspondence with a colleague at another Colorado park. I've heard it myself, Reyes wrote, 3 times. It doesn't sound like water. It doesn't sound like echoes. It sounds like children counting, slowly, clearly, in English. And it always stops at 12, always. I've listened for 13. It never comes. He added, the acoustics explanation doesn't account for the recordings. I've heard Derek Okonkwo's audio. Those are voices, human voices, or something that sounds exactly like them, coming from inside the rock. Reyes left the Park Service in 2020 to pursue graduate studies in ecology. he has declined requests to discuss the phenomenon further. Rifle Falls State Park receives approximately 90,000 visitors annually, most of them during the summer months when the falls are at their most spectacular. The caves remain open, unregulated, accessible to anyone willing to climb the short trail. Families still bring their children to walk behind the waterfall, to feel the mist on their faces, to peer into the darkness and imagine what lies beyond. Most hear only water, the roar of the falls, the drip of moisture from the ceiling, the ordinary sounds of a limestone cave in a wet environment. But some hear more. In the deeper passages, past the point where the tourist traffic fades and the light from the entrance no longer reaches, voices emerge from the stone. Small voices, patient voices, counting in perfect sequence toward a number they never exceed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then silence. And then the count begins again. The Ute grandmothers told their children not to count along, not to join the game, not to speak the numbers that come after 12. They did not say what would happen if someone did, perhaps because no one who counted past 12 ever came back to tell them. They mapped the same room 3 times. 6 months later, 2 of those rooms no longer existed. Fixin' to Die Cave lies deep within the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, one of the most dramatic geological features in North America. The canyon itself drops over 2,000 feet in places, its walls so steep and narrow that some sections receive only 33 minutes of direct sunlight per day. The Gunnison River carved this wound in the earth over 2 million years, exposing Precambrian rock nearly 2 billion years old, some of the oldest exposed stone on the continent. The caves within the canyon walls are rare and poorly documented. The terrain is too treacherous for casual exploration, and the National Park Service has never prioritized systematic surveys of the canyon's subterranean features. Most of what exists in official records comes from climbing expeditions that stumbled upon cave entrances while scaling the cliffs, or from geological teams conducting broader assessments of the canyon's structure. Fixin' to Die Cave earned its name from the climbers who discovered its entrance in 1971, a reference allegedly to the difficulty of reaching it. The entrance sits approximately 800 feet below the canyon's north rim, accessible only by technical ropework down a near vertical face of dark schist and gneiss. The climbers who found it described a horizontal passage extending perhaps 200 feet into the cliff, terminating in what they called a room full of weird rock. For over 2 decades, that description was the entirety of the cave's documentation. In the spring of 1994, the United States Geological Survey authorized a detailed mapping project of several caves in the Black Canyon region. The work was part of a broader assessment of groundwater movement and geological stability, prompted by concerns about erosion affecting visitor infrastructure on the canyon rim. The team assigned to Fixin' to Die Cave consisted of 4 members: Dr. Nathaniel Barber, a geologist specializing in metamorphic rock formations; Sandra Kimathi, a cartographer with 15 years of cave surveying experience; Paul Westergaard, a graduate student in geology from the University of Colorado; and Miguel Olvera, a technical climbing specialist who handled rope access and safety. The team made their first descent on April 12th. The plan was straightforward: establish anchor points, descend to the cave entrance, conduct a preliminary survey, and return within 8 hours. The actual expedition took 11 hours due to unexpected passage extensions. The cave proved to be significantly larger than the 1971 description suggested. The main passage goes much deeper than anyone realized. Barber wrote in his field notes, "We followed it approximately 2,000 feet before time constraints forced us to turn back. The cave shows evidence of multiple formation periods with some unusual mineralogical characteristics that warrant further study." The team returned 4 more times over the following 2 months, incrementally mapping the system and collecting samples. By mid-June, they had documented approximately 4,000 feet of passage. The cave was complex, multiple branching routes, vertical drops requiring rope work, and at least 3 distinct geological zones suggesting different formation histories. It was during the 5th expedition, on June 23rd, that they encountered the formation. Sandra Kimathi was the first to notice it. The team had split into pairs to survey parallel passages, Barber and Kimathi taking the left branch, Westergaard and Olvera the right. Approximately 1,800 feet from the entrance, Kimathi's passage opened into a small chamber, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, with a low ceiling that required crouching. In the center of the chamber sat a rock formation unlike anything she had seen in the cave. A column of dark stone, roughly 4 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, with distinctive banding patterns, alternating layers of black and rust red that spiraled around the column like a barber pole. The red bands were thick with iron deposits unusual for the cave's predominantly metamorphic geology. Kimathi documented the formation thoroughly. Photographs from multiple angles, measurements, sample collection from a small chip at the base. Her notes described the column as anomalous, not consistent with surrounding rock type, possible intrusion from different geological period. When the team reconvened at the entrance that evening, Westergaard mentioned that he had seen something similar. Identical, actually, he said. Spiral banding, iron deposits, about 4 feet tall, in a chamber maybe half a mile from where you were. Barber was skeptical. Identical formations at that distance would be unusual, not impossible, but worthy of verification. The team agreed to revisit both locations on their next expedition. The 6th expedition took place on July 15th. The team devoted the entire day to examining the 2 formations Kimathi and Westergaard had documented. Barber's assessment, recorded in his official field report, confirmed what seemed impossible. The formations were not merely similar, but identical. Physical dimensions match within measurement error, he wrote. Banding patterns are indistinguishable. Chemical analysis of samples shows the same mineral composition, including trace elements that should vary between deposits. These formations did not develop independently. They are, for all measurable purposes, the same object. The formations were located in chambers separated by approximately 2,800 feet of passage, with multiple branches and elevation changes between them. There was no obvious geological mechanism that could produce such perfect duplication. While documenting the 2nd formation, Olvera discovered a 3rd. He had been exploring a side passage near Westergaard's chamber, looking for potential continuation routes, when he found another chamber of similar dimensions containing another spiral column. Same height, same banding, same rust-red iron deposits spiraling through black stone. I called the others over, Olvera later wrote in a personal account of the expedition. We stood there looking at it for maybe 10 minutes without saying anything. 3 identical formations in 3 separate locations. I've been climbing and caving for 20 years. I've never seen anything like it. The team documented all 3 formations with GPS coordinates, detailed measurements, and extensive photography. They collected samples from each. The coordinates placed the formations in a rough triangle, with distances of approximately 2,800 feet, 3,100 feet, and 1,900 feet between them. Barber's field notes from that day contain an uncharacteristic observation. I do not have an explanation for this. The formations appear to be the same object existing in 3 places simultaneously. This is not possible. But this is what the data shows. The team returned to Fixin-to-Die Cave on January 8, 1995, approximately 6 months after their final summer expedition. The purpose was to collect additional samples for laboratory analysis and to verify measurements with more precise equipment. Kimathi's chamber was unchanged. The spiral formation stood exactly where she had documented it, identical in every respect to her photographs from July. Westergaard's chamber was gone. The GPS coordinates led to a solid rock wall. No chamber, no passage, no indication that an opening had ever existed. The team spent 2 hours searching the surrounding area, checking for navigation errors, looking for alternate routes that might have led to a different chamber. They found nothing. The wall showed no evidence of recent collapse, Barber wrote in his amended field report. No rubble, no fracturing, no dust accumulation that would indicate a cave-in. The rock appeared undisturbed, consistent with formations millions of years old. It was as though the chamber had never existed. Olvera's chamber had also vanished. The GPS coordinates pointed to another solid wall in a completely different section of the cave. Same absence of evidence, same impossible geology. The team spent 3 days searching for the missing formations. They found nothing. The only spiral column that remained was Kimathi's original discovery, standing alone in its chamber, precisely where it had always been. Doctors. Barber submitted his final report to the USGS in March of 1995. The report documented the cave's layout, geological characteristics, and potential significance for groundwater studies. It made no mention of the duplicate formations or their subsequent disappearance. In a letter to a colleague at the Colorado School of Mines, written several months after the report's submission, Barber explained his decision. "I could not include data that I cannot explain," he wrote. 3 identical formations in 3 locations is anomalous. 2 of those formations ceasing to exist is impossible. I have the photographs, the samples, the GPS coordinates. The evidence is real. But the evidence describes something that cannot happen, and I am not prepared to stake my professional reputation on documenting the impossible. The samples collected from all 3 formations were analyzed at a USGS laboratory in Denver. The results confirmed what the field observations suggested. The samples were chemically identical, down to trace isotope ratios that should vary between deposits. The laboratory technician noted that the samples appeared to originate from a single source, despite being collected from 3 separate locations. When Barber was asked to explain the discrepancy, he declined to comment. Sandra Kimathi left the USGS in 1998 and transitioned to private sector consulting. She has rarely discussed the Fixin-to-Die Cave survey, but in a 2016 interview with a documentary crew researching geological anomalies, she offered a brief reflection. "I've mapped over 200 caves," she said. "I know how to read rock. I know what's possible and what isn't. Those formations were real. I touched them. I photographed them. I chipped samples off their surfaces. And then 2 of them weren't there anymore." She paused. "The GPS coordinates are still in my records. I've never gone back to check. But I know what they'd show. Solid rock, no passage, no chamber. As if the cave decided to forget what it had made." Paul Westergaard completed his doctorate and now teaches at a university in New Mexico. He has never published anything related to the Fixin-to-Die Cave survey. Miguel Olvera continues to work as a technical climbing specialist and has reportedly returned to the cave twice since 1995. Both times finding only Kimathi's original formation, standing alone in its small chamber. Dr. Nathaniel Barber retired from the USGS in 2008. His papers, donated to the Colorado School of Mines Library, include an unmarked folder containing photographs of 3 identical spiral columns in 3 separate chambers, annotated with GPS coordinates that no longer lead anywhere. A handwritten note clipped to the folder reads, "Geology does not work this way. Caves do not unmake themselves. Either we were wrong about what we saw, or we were wrong about what caves are." Fixin-to-Die Cave remains unmapped in any official database. The USGS survey was never published, and the National Park Service has no plans to develop or publicize the cave's location. Access requires technical climbing skills and permits that are rarely granted. One formation still stands in the darkness, 1,800 feet from an entrance that few people will ever reach. A spiral column of black and rust, 4 feet tall, unlike anything else in the Black Canyon's ancient rock. It stands alone now. But the photographs show 3. And somewhere in the geometry of that impossible cave, 2 chambers full of identical stone have folded back into the mountain, leaving nothing but coordinates that point to walls that remember nothing. The hands that made those prints had one too many joints, or one too few. No one could agree which was worse. La Garita Wilderness sprawls across 129,000 acres of the San Juan Mountains in south-central Colorado, a landscape of volcanic peaks, alpine tundra, and valleys carved by glaciers that retreated 10,000 years ago. The wilderness takes its name from a Spanish phrase meaning the lookout, a reference to the high points used by early settlers to watch for approaching weather or hostile parties. It is one of the least visited wilderness areas in Colorado, accessible only by trails that climb to over 13,000 feet and cross terrain that remains snow-covered 8 months of the year. Picture Cave lies on the northern edge of the wilderness at approximately 11,400 feet on a ridge overlooking the headwaters of Saguache Creek. The cave's entrance is a narrow horizontal slot in a volcanic cliff face, invisible from below, and accessible only by a steep scramble across loose scree. It was first documented in 1923 by a rancher named Horace Fullerton, who noted the presence of Indian markings near the entrance and reported his findings to the Colorado Historical Society. The markings Fullerton described are genuine, a series of petroglyphs depicting geometric shapes, animal figures, and human-like forms, carved into the soft volcanic rock within the first 50 feet of the cave. Archaeologists have studied these images intermittently since the 1940s, attributing them to ancestral Puebloan peoples who inhabited the region between 800 and 1400 years ago. The petroglyphs are considered significant, but not exceptional. Similar examples exist throughout the Southwest. What lies deeper in the cave remained undocumented until 2011. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez was an archaeologist at Fort Lewis College in Durango, specializing in prehistoric rock art of the Four Corners region. In the summer of 2011, she received funding for a comprehensive survey of Picture Cave, intended to produce a complete photographic record of the known petroglyphs and assess the site's condition. Her team consisted of 3 graduate students, Kenji Nakamura, Priya Sundaram, and Christopher Bellamy, and a technical consultant named Robert Tso, a member of the Navajo Nation who had worked with Vasquez on previous projects involving indigenous cultural sites. The team arrived at Picture Cave on July 19th and spent the first 2 days documenting the entrance chamber and the known petroglyph panels. The work was routine, photographing, measuring, noting areas of weathering or damage. By the morning of July 21st, they had completed their primary objectives. It was Tso who suggested exploring deeper. The passage continues past the last petroglyph panel, he noted in his field journal. Approximately 80 feet of documented cave, but the airflow suggests significantly more depth. Previous surveys may have been incomplete. Vasquez agreed to a reconnaissance. The team proceeded carefully, noting that the passage narrowed considerably beyond the documented sections. After approximately 150 feet, they reached a chamber that had never been formally surveyed, a room roughly 30 feet wide with a low ceiling and walls of dark volcanic rock. The walls were covered in handprints. Vasquez's initial assessment, recorded on her field recorder that afternoon, captures the team's reaction. "We're looking at, I don't know how to estimate, hundreds of handprints, red pigment, probably ochre. They cover the entire back wall floor to ceiling. Some are overlapping. The preservation is remarkable. The color is still vivid, almost fresh-looking." She paused on the recording. These aren't like the prints in the entrance. The style is different, older, maybe. And there's something about the proportions I need to measure this properly." The team spent the remainder of the day photographing the chamber and collecting preliminary measurements. They did not remove any samples. Vasquez insisted on proper protocols before any physical contact with the pigments. It was Nakamura, reviewing photographs that evening at base camp, who first articulated what everyone had sensed, but not said. "The thumbs are wrong," he said. "Look at the angles. The thumb on a human hand opposes at a specific point, the carpometacarpal joint. These prints show opposition at a different location, lower toward the wrist. That's not possible with human anatomy." Vasquez examined the photographs herself. Then she examined them again. "We're going back tomorrow," she said, "with better equipment, and no one mentions this to anyone until we understand what we're looking at." The team spent 3 additional days documenting the handprint chamber. Their measurements confirmed Nakamura's observation. The prints were anatomically inconsistent with modern human hands. The proportions were close enough to appear human at first glance. 5 digits, similar size ratios, recognizable palmar structure. But detailed analysis revealed anomalies that could not be explained by artistic distortion or pigment spread. The thumb placement suggested a joint structure that would allow opposition at a point approximately 2 centimeters lower than any known hominid, human, Neanderthal, or otherwise. The fingers showed subtle differences in segment length ratios. The overall effect was of hands that were almost human, but not quite. Vasquez collected pigment samples on July 24th, following protocols approved by the Colorado State Historic Preservation Office. The samples were sent to 3 separate laboratories for analysis, one for pigment composition, one for organic binder identification, and one for radiocarbon dating. The results arrived over the following 4 months. The pigment was iron oxide, red ochre, consistent with prehistoric rock art throughout the Americas. The binder appeared to be animal fat, also consistent with known techniques. Nothing unusual. The radiocarbon dating was different. The organic material in the pigment dated to approximately 11,200 years before present, with a margin of error of plus or minus 300 years. This placed the handprints at the end of the Pleistocene epoch, during the transition from the last ice age, roughly 8,000 years before the earliest known human habitation of the Colorado Highlands. Vasquez published her findings in the spring 2012 issue of the Journal of Archaeological Method and Theory. The paper, titled "Anomalous Palmar Morphology in Pleistocene-Era Rock Art," a preliminary report from La Garita Wilderness, Colorado, presented the evidence cautiously, noting the unusual anatomical features and the unexpectedly early dating while acknowledging the need for further study. The paper was peer-reviewed by 3 anonymous experts. All 3 recommended publication, though one noted that the implications of this discovery, if verified, would require significant revision of current models of human presence in North America. The academic response was immediate and polarized. Several prominent archaeologists praised the methodology while expressing skepticism about the dating results. Others questioned whether the anatomical anomalies might be artistic conventions rather than accurate representations of actual hands. A few suggested contamination of the samples or laboratory error. 3 months after publication, the journal issued a retraction. The retraction notice, published in the summer 2012 issue, stated that the paper had been withdrawn due to methodological concerns identified during post-publication review. No specific concerns were listed. No errors were identified. The notice was signed by the journal's editorial board, but included no individual names. Vasquez was not consulted before the retraction was issued. In the years following the retraction, Vasquez made several attempts to understand what had happened. Her correspondence, preserved in her personal papers at Fort Lewis College, documents a frustrating series of non-responses. The journal's editor-in-chief declined to specify the methodological concerns, citing confidentiality of the review process. The 3 original peer reviewers, contacted individually, all stated that they had not requested or recommended retraction. The laboratories that conducted the dating analysis stood by their results, noting that their methods had been validated repeatedly and that no errors had been identified in the picture cave samples. In a 2014 letter to a colleague at the University of New Mexico, Vasquez summarized her conclusions. "Someone wanted that paper to disappear," she wrote. "I don't know who or why. The retraction doesn't cite a single flaw because there isn't one. The data is solid. The photographs are real. The dating is accurate." 11,000 years ago, something with hands that weren't quite human left its prints on a cave wall in Colorado. And apparently we're not supposed to talk about it. Vasquez retired from Fort Lewis College in 2018. She has declined all interview requests regarding the picture cave discovery since 2015. Robert So returned to Picture Cave twice after the initial survey, once in 2013 and once in 2016. Both visits were unofficial, conducted without permits or institutional backing. His notes from these trips have been shared privately with a small number of researchers. "The chamber is unchanged," he wrote in 2016. "The handprints are still there, still red, still wrong. I spent an hour just looking at them, trying to understand what I was seeing." He added an observation that did not appear in any of the formal documentation. "There's a pattern I didn't notice before. The prints aren't random. They're arranged in groups, 3s and 5s mostly, and they're layered. Older prints underneath, newer prints on top. Whatever made these came back multiple times over. I don't know how long. Centuries, maybe. The cave was important to them. They kept returning." So also noted something Vasquez's team had not documented: faint markings on the floor of the chamber, partially obscured by centuries of dust and sediment. "They look like footprints," he wrote, "but I didn't clear them. I didn't want to disturb what might be there. If the hands are wrong, what would the feet show?" He has not returned to the cave since 2016. The handprints remain in Picture Cave, preserved by the dry air and stable temperature of the deep chamber. No formal archaeological work has been conducted at the site since Vasquez's survey. The Forest Service has no plans to develop or protect the location, as the retracted paper eliminated any official recognition of the discovery's significance. The 3 graduate students who participated in the survey have scattered. Nakamura completed his doctorate and now works for a cultural resource management firm in Arizona. Sundaram left archaeology entirely and teaches high school science in Oregon. Bellamy declined to complete his degree, citing personal reasons. None of them have published anything related to Picture Cave. None of them have returned. The journal that published and retracted Vasquez's paper continues to operate, its editorial board unchanged. The retraction notice remains in the archive. 3 sentences offering no explanation for why a peer-reviewed paper documenting an unprecedented discovery was erased from the scientific record. And in the darkness of La Garita Wilderness, at 11,400 feet, a wall of red ochre handprints waits in a chamber that few people know exists. Hands that pressed against stone 11,000 years ago, leaving marks that should be impossible. The wrong proportions, the wrong joints, the wrong anatomy for anything that should have been walking the Colorado highlands at the end of the last ice age. The prints are still vivid, almost fresh-looking, as if whatever made them might come back. The mountain didn't collapse. It closed. The town of Aspen, Colorado, exists because of silver. In 1879, prospectors discovered rich veins of the metal in the mountains above the Roaring Fork Valley, and within a decade, the remote mining camp had transformed into one of the wealthiest cities per capita in the United States. Grand hotels rose along streets that had been mud tracks a few years before. Opera houses hosted touring companies from New York and Europe. Fortunes were made and lost in the time it took to sink a shaft. The smuggler mine was among the most productive operations in the district. Located on the steep slopes of Smuggler Mountain, just northeast of town, the mine produced millions of dollars in silver ore between 1880 and 1893, when the federal government's shift away from silver-backed currency collapsed the market and sent Aspen into a decline from which it would not recover for half a century. By 1894, the smuggler was operating at reduced capacity, its workforce cut by two-thirds, its deepest tunnels barely maintained. The owners had shifted their attention to other ventures, leaving day-to-day operations to a skeleton crew under the supervision of a foreman named William Aldrich. Aldrich had worked in mines since the age of 14, first in Pennsylvania coal country, then in the silver camps of Nevada and Colorado. His personal journal, preserved in the archives of the Aspen Historical Society, provides the most detailed account of what happened in the smuggler mine in the months before it was sealed, and what the miners found in the darkness before the mountain closed around them. The first entry of note is dated February 3, 1894. Aldrich's handwriting is steady, his tone matter-of-fact. Hendricks and Kowalski refused shift in lower tunnel today, claimed they heard sounds from behind the rock face. Music, they said, like a church choir. I sent Navarro to check. He found nothing. Docked the two of them a day's pay. Cannot have superstition disrupting work. 3 days later, another entry. Fredrickson, also hearing the music, described it as hymns, many voices, coming from the east wall of the lower drift. No visible cracks or openings in that section. Rock is solid. I listened for 10 minutes and heard nothing, but Fredrickson is not given to fancy. By mid-February, the reports had multiplied. At least 7 miners claimed to have heard the sounds, always from the same section of the lower tunnel, always described as choral music, though the specific character varied. Some heard Latin hymns, others heard wordless harmonies. One miner, a recent immigrant from County Cork named Patrick Dunn, insisted the voices were singing in Irish. Aldrich's journal reflects growing frustration. The men are spooked. Production is down 12%. I have listened in the lower drift on 4 separate occasions and heard nothing. Either the men are lying or they are hearing something I cannot. On February 28th, Aldrich made a different observation. The east wall of the lower drift feels different, warmer than the surrounding rock. I pressed my palm against it and felt, not vibration exactly, a pulse, like a heartbeat, very slow. I did not tell the men. On March 15th, 1894, a routine blast in the lower tunnel broke through into open space. The explosion was intended to extend the drift eastward, following a vein of silver that geological surveys suggested continued deeper into the mountain. Instead of solid rock, the charge opened a hole approximately 4 feet in diameter, leading into darkness. Aldrich was summoned immediately. His journal entry from that evening is longer than usual, the handwriting less controlled. We have found a cave, not a pocket or a void, a cave with passages extending beyond the reach of our lamps. The air that came through the opening was cold, far colder than it should be at this depth. And it carried a smell I cannot describe, not sulfur, not rot, something older, something that has never been breathed. He sent 2 men through the opening to conduct a preliminary survey. Thomas Brennan, an experienced miner who had worked the smuggler since 1882, and a younger man named Joseph Horvat. They were equipped with lanterns, rope, and instructions to proceed no more than 200 feet before returning. They were gone for 3 hours. When they emerged, Brennan refused to speak. Horvat was weeping. Neither man would describe what they had seen, despite repeated questioning from Aldrich and the other miners. Aldrich's entry continues. Brennan resigned on the spot. said he would not go underground again, not here, not anywhere. Horvat is in no condition to work. I have sealed the opening temporarily with timber and canvas. Tomorrow I will see for myself what they found. There is no journal entry for March 16th. The next entry is dated March 17th, and it is brief. I went in. I should not have gone in. The music is real. It is not coming from people. Aldrich did not elaborate. His subsequent entries over the following 2 weeks focus on mundane operational matters, ore shipments, equipment repairs, payroll calculations. He makes no further mention of the cave or the sounds, but other accounts fill in what his journal does not say. A letter from Patrick Dunn to his sister in Galway, written in late March and preserved in a private collection, describes the atmosphere in the mine. The foreman will not speak of what he saw, but we all know something is wrong. The lower tunnel is closed now. He says the timbers are unsafe, but I have worked in mines since I was a boy, and those timbers were sound. The music continues. I hear it sometimes when I am working the upper levels, faint, far away, as though it is rising up through the rock itself. Voices singing in a language none of us know. It is not Latin. It is not any tongue of men. Dunn added a detail that appears nowhere else. One of the boys swears he saw something through the canvas that covers the opening. A light, he said, moving in the darkness beyond, not a lantern, something that glowed from within like a fish in deep water. He will not go near that section of the mine anymore. None of us will. The collapse occurred on April 7th, 1894. According to official records, a section of the lower tunnel gave way without warning, burying approximately 120 feet of passage under tons of rock and earth. No miners were killed. The collapse happened during a shift change when the lower levels were unoccupied. The section that fell included the breakthrough into the cave system. Aldrich's report to the mine owners, filed on April 9th, attributed the collapse to unforeseen structural weakness in the eastern drift. He recommended permanent abandonment of the lower workings and concentration of operations in the upper tunnels. But his personal journal tells a different story. The entry for April 7th reads, "Collapse in the lower tunnel. The section that connected to the cave is gone, but I was there this morning checking the timbers. There was no weakness, no cracking, no stress, no warning. The mountain was solid." The next entry, April 8th, is more disturbing. I spoke with Navarro, who was working the level above when it happened. He said he heard the music stop. For the first time in weeks, complete silence from below. Then the collapse. He thinks the cave closed itself. He thinks whatever is down there did not want to be found. Aldrich's final entry regarding the incident is dated April 10th. It consists of a single line underlined twice. They sealed it themselves. He did not specify who they were. The smuggler mine continued limited operations until 1898, when falling silver prices made extraction uneconomical. The property changed hands several times over the following century, used intermittently for small-scale mining, and eventually converted into a tourist attraction offering guided tours of the upper workings. The lower tunnels remain sealed. Modern surveys conducted in the 1980s and 2000s have mapped the accessible sections of the mine, but have not attempted to penetrate the collapse zone from 1894. Ground-penetrating radar studies in 2005 produced inconclusive results. The data suggested open space beyond the debris field, but the resolution was insufficient to determine whether this represented the cave system Aldrich's men discovered or simply voids created by the collapse itself. A geologist named Dr. Miriam Oduya, who participated in the 2005 study, noted an anomaly in her field report that was not included in the final published survey. Acoustic monitoring detected low-frequency vibrations emanating from the sealed section, she wrote. The frequency range is consistent with human vocalization, specifically choral arrangements with multiple overlapping voices. However, there is no known human presence in the sealed area, and the vibrations appear to originate from a point beyond the collapse zone, deeper in the mountain than any documented passage. Oduya recommended further investigation. Her recommendation was not acted upon. The survey was completed without additional acoustic studies, and her anomaly report was filed separately from the main documentation. William Aldrich left Aspen in the fall of 1894, relocating to a ranch in the San Luis Valley where he lived until his death in 1923. He never worked in mining again. His journal was donated to the Aspen Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1978, with a note explaining that he had never spoken of his time at the Smuggler Mine and had left instructions that his papers not be read until after her death. Thomas Brennan, the miner who entered the cave and emerged refusing to speak, died in 1899 in a railroad accident in Wyoming. He had no surviving family, and no personal papers have been found. Josip Horvat returned to Croatia in 1895. A letter from a cousin, written decades later, mentions that Horvat had entered a monastery shortly after his return and taken a vow of silence that he maintained until his death in 1931. The letter does not explain why. Patrick Dunn remained in Aspen until 1900, when he moved to California. In a letter to his sister written in 1907, he mentioned the Smuggler Mine only once. "I still hear the music sometimes in dreams, voices singing something that is almost beautiful, almost familiar, but wrong in a way I cannot explain. I do not think I will ever stop hearing it." The Smuggler Mine stands open to visitors today, its upper tunnels safe and well lit, its history presented through interpretive displays that emphasize the silver boom and Aspen's transformation from mining camp to ski resort. The guided tours do not mention the cave system discovered in 1894. The collapse is attributed to natural causes. The music is not discussed, but the lower tunnels remain sealed exactly as they have been for over 130 years. The debris from the collapse has never been cleared. Whatever lies beyond, the cold cave with its ancient air, the passages that extended into darkness, the source of the sounds that miners heard and foremen refused to explain, remains untouched. Somewhere deep in Smuggler Mountain, beneath tons of rock and timber, a passage once opened into something that should not have been found. Something that sang in voices that were not human, in languages that no one recognized, in harmonies that made men weep and flee and take vows of silence. The mountain closed that passage in 1894, and whatever sang in the darkness has been waiting ever since. He has been asking the same question for 44 years. No one has ever known the answer. The San Luis Valley is the largest alpine valley in North America, a flat expanse of high desert, ringed by mountains that trap cold air in winter and shimmer with heat mirages in summer. At its eastern edge, where the Sangre de Cristo Range rises abruptly from the valley floor, sits one of the most incongruous landscapes on the continent. Great Sand Dunes National Park, where winds have piled sand into dunes that reach over 750 feet, the tallest in North America. Most visitors come for the dunes themselves, the surreal experience of climbing mountains of sand with snow-capped peaks as a backdrop. Fewer venture into the surrounding terrain, where the geology becomes stranger and the crowds thin to nothing. On the northeastern boundary of the park, at the base of the Sangre de Cristos, lies a series of lava tubes formed by volcanic activity roughly 4 million years ago. The tubes are remnants of ancient lava flows that cooled on the outside while molten rock continued to drain from within, leaving hollow passages that snake through the dark basalt. Most are small, crawlways and crevices that extend only a few dozen feet, but a few are large enough to walk through, and at least one system extends deep enough that its full extent has never been mapped. The Park Service does not publicize these caves. They appear on no official maps, and rangers do not direct visitors to their locations. The terrain is difficult, the entrances are unmarked, and the passages are considered hazardous for inexperienced explorers. But people find them anyway. And some of them, over the past 5 decades, have found something else. The first documented account comes from a hiker named Gerald Okonkwo, who explored the lava tubes in August of 1972. Okonkwo was a graduate student in geology at the University of Colorado, conducting field research on volcanic formations in the San Luis Valley. His field notes, preserved in the university's archives, include a brief but unsettling entry. Encountered a man approximately 300 feet into the main tube, tall, perhaps 6'2" or 6'3", wearing a long brown coat despite the summer heat. He was standing in the passage facing me, as though he had been waiting. Asked me a question. "Did you bring it back?" I asked what he meant. He smiled, odd smile, too wide, and turned and walked deeper into the cave. I followed for perhaps 50 feet but lost sight of him. The passage was straight. I don't know where he went. Okonkwo reported the encounter to a park ranger the following day, concerned that someone might be living in the caves. The ranger noted the report but took no action. The description was too vague, and solo hikers occasionally camped in remote areas of the park without permits. 3 years later, in 1975, a couple from Texas reported an identical encounter. Same location, same description, tall man, brown coat, same question, same response when they asked for clarification. The woman, identified in park records only as Mrs. Harmon, provided a written statement that is still on file. He asked if we brought it back. My husband said, "Brought what back?" The man just smiled at us. His teeth were very white. Then he walked into the dark. We didn't follow. Something about him wasn't right. Between 1972 and 2016, the Park Service documented 14 separate reports of encounters with a man matching the same description. The witnesses ranged in age from 19 to 67. They came from different states, visited in different seasons, and had no connection to one another. Most were solo hikers or small groups who had ventured into the lava tubes out of curiosity. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. The man is tall. Estimates range from 6 feet 1 inch to 6 feet 4 inches. He wears a long brown coat, sometimes described as wool, sometimes as canvas, always reaching below his knees. His age is difficult to determine. Witnesses have guessed anywhere from 35 to 60. His hair is dark, his build is thin, and his face is described as ordinary or forgettable, except for one feature, his smile. Every witness who saw him smile described it the same way: too wide, too many teeth, held for too long, and every witness reported the same interaction. The man asks a question, "Did you bring it back?" in a calm, conversational tone. When the witness asks what he means, he smiles. Then he turns and walks deeper into the cave, disappearing into the darkness within seconds. No one has ever seen him exit the lava tubes. No one has ever encountered him outside the caves. No one has ever answered his question to his apparent satisfaction. In 1989, a park ranger named Florence Yazzie conducted the most thorough investigation of the phenomenon to date. Yazzie, a 20-year veteran of the Park Service with experience in search and rescue operations, had become interested in the reports after taking a statement from a shaken hiker who claimed to have seen the man earlier that summer. Yazzie's investigation notes, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2014, document her efforts to locate the stranger or explain the sightings. "I conducted 3 separate searches of the primary lava tube system over a 2-week period," Yazzie wrote. "Total search time approximately 18 hours. The caves are not extensive. The main passage is roughly 900 feet long with 3 significant branches. I mapped every accessible section. There is no evidence of habitation, no bedding, no food waste, no human waste, no personal effects. No indication that anyone has camped or sheltered in these caves for an extended period, she continued. I also reviewed all 14 witness statements in detail. The consistency is unusual. Different people over 17 years describe the same man, the same clothing, the same question, the same behavior. Either this is an elaborate hoax maintained by multiple unconnected individuals, which seems improbable, or there is someone in these caves who has been approaching hikers for nearly 2 decades. Yazie's final observation was more personal. I spent a total of 6 hours in the caves alone, hoping to encounter the subject myself. I did not. But I will note that the caves have an unusual quality. Sound behaves strangely. Echoes return at wrong intervals, or not at all. And there is a persistent sense of being observed. I am not prone to superstition, but I was uncomfortable in a way I cannot fully explain. She recommended increased monitoring of the lava tube area. Her recommendation was not implemented. The most detailed witness account came in 2004 from a wildlife biologist named Dr. Samuel Nkrumah, who was conducting a bat survey in the caves. Nkrumah was working alone, approximately 400 feet into the main tube, when he encountered the man. His official report to the Park Service is clinical, but a personal account he shared with colleagues provides more detail. He was just there. I don't know how he approached without me hearing. The cave floor is covered in loose rock. Every step makes noise. But suddenly he was standing about 15 feet away, watching me. Tall, thin, wearing this old brown coat that looked like it belonged in another century. Nkrumah described what happened next. He asked me, "Did you bring it back?" Very calm, very polite, like he was asking about the weather. I assumed he was a confused hiker, maybe someone who'd gotten separated from a group. I asked him what he was looking for. He smiled at me, and this is the part I can't explain rationally, and his smile was wrong, too wide, like his face was stretching in a way faces don't stretch. The man turned and walked into the darkness. Nkrumah followed, concerned for the stranger's safety. The passage curved slightly to the left, about 50 feet past where we were standing. I was maybe 10 seconds behind him. When I rounded the curve, the passage was empty. Straight for another 200 feet, no side branches, nowhere to hide. He was gone. Nkrumah searched for 30 minutes before abandoning the effort. He noted one additional detail that does not appear in earlier reports. Where he had been standing, there was a patch of discolored rock on the cave floor. Darker than the surrounding basalt, roughly circular, about 2 feet in diameter. It looked almost like a scorch mark, but cold to the touch. I photographed it. When I returned 2 days later to collect a sample, it was gone. The floor was uniform basalt again. The most recent documented sighting occurred in October of 2016. A college student named Rebecca Osterman was hiking alone in the area when she entered the lava tubes on impulse. Her account, posted to an online hiking forum 3 weeks after the incident, generated significant attention before she deleted it. I'd heard there were caves out there and wanted to see them. Bad idea to go alone, I know. I was maybe 5 minutes into the main cave when I saw someone ahead of me, a man in a dark coat. I called out to say hello, to let him know I was there. He turned around and looked at me. Osterman described the exchange. He said, "Did you bring it back?" I didn't understand. I asked him to repeat himself. He said the same thing again, exact same words, exact same tone, like a recording. "Did you bring it back?" I asked what he meant. He smiled. She paused in her account. I've never seen a smile like that. It wasn't threatening exactly, it was just wrong. Like someone who had learned how to smile from a description but had never actually seen one. Too many teeth, too wide, held for too long. The man turned and walked away. Osterman did not follow. I got out of there as fast as I could. I've done a lot of solo hiking, and I don't scare easily. But something about that man, about that question, felt like a warning I didn't understand. Like I'd walked into the middle of something that had been happening for a very long time and I needed to leave before I became part of it. The Park Service has never issued an official statement regarding the sightings. Rangers who discuss the matter privately tend toward skepticism. The caves are accessible, the description is generic, and the encounters could be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or fabrication. But the consistency remains difficult to dismiss. 14 witnesses over 44 years with no apparent connection to one another, describing the same man, the same question, the same smile, the same disappearance into darkness. Florence Yazzie retired from the Park Service in 2001. In a 2012 interview with a researcher compiling accounts of unusual park phenomena, she offered a final reflection. "I've thought about that man for over 20 years," she said. "Who he is, what he wants, what it is, the thing he keeps asking about. I never found answers. But I'll tell you what I believe. He's not living in those caves. There's nowhere to live. No water, no food, no shelter. He's not coming and going. No one has ever seen him outside. He's just there, waiting, asking the same question, and someday someone is going to give him the answer he's looking for." She paused. "I hope I never find out what happens then." The lava tubes near Great Sand Dunes remain unmarked and unpublicized. Hikers still find them occasionally, drawn by curiosity or word of mouth. Most explore for a few minutes and leave, seeing nothing unusual. But some emerge with stories of a tall man in a brown coat who appeared without sound and vanished without trace. A man who asked them a question they couldn't answer about something they didn't have. Did you bring it back? 44 years, 14 witnesses. The same question. Somewhere in the darkness of those ancient lava tubes, he is still waiting, and he is still asking. Water does not flow uphill, except in one cave for 3 days each year, when it does. San Isabel National Forest covers more than 1 million acres of the central Colorado Rockies, stretching from the Collegiate Peaks in the north to the Spanish Peaks in the south. The forest encompasses 14 of Colorado's 54 14ers, along with hundreds of miles of trails, dozens of alpine lakes, and geological features that range from ancient granite batholiths to relatively young volcanic formations. Hubbard Cave lies in the southern portion of the forest at approximately 9,600 feet on a limestone ridge above the Huerfano River drainage. The cave is small by Colorado standards, roughly 800 feet of surveyed passage, and receives little attention from the caving community. Its entrance is difficult to locate, hidden among a jumble of boulders on a steep north-facing slope, and its passages are tight, wet, and generally considered unpleasant to explore. The cave was first documented in 1927 by a Forest Service surveyor named Charles Hubbard, who noted its location on a topographic map, but provided no description of its interior. For decades, it remained essentially unknown, visited only by occasional hunters who used the entrance chamber as a shelter during storms. That changed in 1983 when a group of cavers from Pueblo discovered something in Hubbard Cave that should not exist. The discovery was made on September 23, 1983. The autumn equinox. The caving party consisted of 3 members, Luis Esperanza, his wife Maria, and a friend named Donald Weaver. They had entered the cave in the early afternoon, planning a routine survey of the passage beyond the entrance chamber. Approximately 300 feet from the entrance, the cave opens into a room the team dubbed the Fountain Chamber, a name that would prove unexpectedly apt. Maria Esperanza's trip report, published in the Rocky Mountain Caving newsletter later that year, describes what they found. The chamber is roughly oval, perhaps 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a ceiling that varies from 8 to 15 feet. The floor is covered with flowstone and breakdown. At the far end, there is a vertical rock face approximately 15 feet high, with a pool at its base and another pool at its top. She continued, When we entered the chamber, we observed water flowing up the rock face, not dripping, not seeping, flowing, a visible stream approximately 2 inches wide, moving from the lower pool to the upper pool against gravity. The water was clear and appeared to be moving at a rate of perhaps 1 gallon per minute. The team spent 2 hours in the chamber documenting the phenomenon with photographs and measurements. The water was cold, approximately 42 degrees Fahrenheit, and appeared to emerge from a crack at the base of the rock face, travel upward along a channel worn into the limestone, and disappear into a similar crack at the top. The upper pool had no visible outlet. The lower pool had no visible inlet other than condensation from the cave walls. When the team returned 1 week later, the flow had stopped. Both pools were still present, but the rock face between them was dry. The Esperanzas returned to Hubbard Cave multiple times over the following years, attempting to understand the pattern of the water's behavior. Their observations, compiled in a series of trip reports and personal correspondence, established what they called the 72-hour rule. The spring activates within hours of the autumn equinox, sometimes before, sometimes after, but always within a window of approximately 6 hours centered on the astronomical event. Once active, it flows continuously for exactly 72 hours, then stops. The water level in both pools remains constant throughout the flow period, suggesting that the volume entering the upper pool equals the volume leaving the lower pool through some unseen channel. We have observed the phenomenon on 9 separate occasions between 1983 and 1995, Luis Esperanza wrote in a 1996 letter to a hydrologist at Colorado State University. The timing is precise to within minutes. The duration is invariable. We have no explanation. The Esperanzas attempted several experiments. They introduced non-toxic dye into the lower pool during an active period. The dye appeared in the upper pool approximately 4 minutes later, confirming that the visible flow was indeed transporting water upward. They measured the temperature differential between the two pools. It was negligible. They searched for hidden passages or siphons that might explain a conventional hydraulic mechanism. They found none. Luis Esperanza died in 2003. Maria continued to visit the cave each September until 2011, when declining health made the difficult approach impossible. Her final trip report noted simply, 49 years of caving. I have never seen anything like this. I will likely never see it again. In 2009, a team of hydrologists from the Colorado School of Mines conducted the first formal scientific study of the Hubbard Cave phenomenon. The team was led by Dr. Priya Venkatesh, a specialist in karst hydrology who had heard about the site through contacts in the caving community. The study took place over a 2-week period surrounding the autumn equinox. The team installed pressure sensors, temperature loggers, and flow meters at multiple points throughout the cave. They conducted dye trace tests, ground-penetrating radar surveys, and detailed chemical analysis of the water. Their findings, summarized in an unpublished report that circulated among karst researchers, were unequivocal. The phenomenon should not be possible. The observed flow rate of approximately 1 gallon per minute, moving vertically against gravity over a distance of 15 feet, would require a pressure differential of approximately 6.5 pounds per square inch, Venkatesh wrote. Our pressure sensors detected no such differential. The water at the base of the rock face and the water at the top are at essentially identical pressure, atmospheric pressure, consistent with open pools. She continued, we considered and rejected several potential explanations. Capillary action cannot account for flow rates of this magnitude. Thermal convection requires a temperature differential we did not observe. Artesian pressure from a confined aquifer would require geological conditions that do not exist at this site. The water is flowing uphill with no detectable force driving it. The team's ground-penetrating radar revealed no hidden passages or chambers that might contain a pumping mechanism natural or artificial. Chemical analysis showed the water to be ordinary groundwater, consistent with local precipitation filtered through limestone. There was nothing unusual about the water itself, only its behavior. Dr. Venkatesh's report included a section titled Temporal Anomalies that received less attention than the hydrological findings but was, in some ways, more disturbing. The 72-hour duration of the flow period is remarkably precise, she wrote. We recorded the start and end times of the 2009 event to the nearest minute. The flow began at 11:47 p.m. on September 22nd and ceased at 11:47 p.m. on September 25th. Exactly 72 hours. She noted that the autumn equinox in 2009 occurred at approximately 3:18 p.m. on September 22nd, roughly 8 hours before the flow began. This was consistent with the Esperanza's observations of a 6-hour window centered on the equinox. The correlation with the equinox is difficult to explain through conventional hydrology, Venkatesh wrote. Seasonal variations in groundwater levels typically occur over weeks or months, not hours, and the precision of the 72-hour duration suggests a mechanism operating with clock-like regularity, something we do not observe in natural hydrological systems. One member of the research team, a graduate student named Thomas Anderson, conducted an independent analysis of the timing data. His calculations, included as an appendix to the report, noted that 72 hours is exactly 3 days, and that 3 days is the time the sun appears to stand still at its extreme positions during the solstices in various ancient astronomical traditions. This may be coincidence, Anderson wrote, but the equinox timing, combined with the 3-day duration, suggests a pattern that is astronomical rather than hydrological. I do not know what to make of this. Neither did anyone else on the team. The 2009 study was never formally published. Venkatesh submitted a paper to the Journal of Hydrology in 2010, but it was rejected by peer reviewers who questioned the methodology and suggested the observations must be erroneous. The reviewers could not accept what we documented, Venkatesh said in a 2015 interview. They assumed we had made a measurement error, or that there was a hidden siphon we had missed, or that we had been deceived somehow. They could not accept that water was flowing uphill with no identifiable cause, because that contradicts everything we know about physics. She paused. But I was there. I watched it. I measured it. The water flows up. For 72 hours, once a year, it flows up. Venkatesh left academia in 2012 to work for a private environmental consulting firm. She has not returned to Hubbard Cave, though she has maintained contact with members of the Colorado caving community who continue to monitor the site. Thomas Anderson completed his doctorate and now teaches at a small college in Oregon. He has never published his analysis of the timing data. In a 2018 email to a researcher compiling accounts of anomalous geological phenomena, he offered a brief explanation. Some things are better left undocumented, he wrote. Not because they're dangerous, but because they don't fit. The water in that cave doesn't fit. It breaks the rules. And I've learned that when something breaks the rules that consistently, for that long, maybe the rules aren't what we think they are. Hubbard Cave remains accessible to those who know its location and are willing to make the difficult approach through San Isabel National Forest. The Forest Service has no plans to develop or restrict the site. Officially, it is simply one of hundreds of small caves scattered throughout the Colorado mountains. Each September, around the autumn equinox, a handful of cavers make the trek to the fountain chamber. They sit in the darkness and watch the water rise, a thin stream defying gravity, climbing a 15-foot rock face with quiet persistence, filling a pool that should be empty with water that should not be there. 72 hours later, it stops. The cave returns to normal. The pool sits still and silent until the following year, when the sun crosses the celestial equator and the water begins to flow again. No one has explained it. The hydrologists could not explain it. The physicists who reviewed the data could not explain it. The cave simply does what it does once a year for exactly 3 days, following a schedule that appears to be set not by geology or hydrology, but by the movement of the Earth around the Sun. The water flows upward. It has been flowing upward since at least 1983, and probably much longer. And somewhere in the mathematics of the universe, there may be an equation that accounts for a spring that activates on the equinox and runs for exactly 72 hours and pushes water up a rock face with no pressure and no force and no explanation. But no one has found it yet. The cave is 62 feet deep. The report describes chambers that would require it to be 600. Pike National Forest sprawls across more than 1 million acres of the Colorado Front Range, from the outskirts of Denver to the flanks of Pikes Peak. It is one of the most visited national forests in the country, drawing millions of hikers, campers, and day trippers each year to trails that wind through granite canyons and ponderosa woodlands. The forest's proximity to Colorado Springs and Denver means that few corners remain truly remote. Even the backcountry sees steady traffic during summer months. Cave of the Clouds sits in the forest's southern section on a rocky hillside above the South Platte River, approximately 15 miles west of Woodland Park. The name is something of a misnomer. The cave has no particular connection to clouds or weather, though local legend suggests that early explorers saw mist rising from the entrance on cold mornings, an effective temperature differential between the cave's interior and the outside air. The cave was first documented in 1903 by a prospector named William Kennicott, who noted its location in a journal entry but did not explore beyond the entrance chamber. Subsequent surveys in 1928 and 1951 established the cave's basic parameters: a single descending passage approximately 62 feet deep, terminating in a flowstone floor with no apparent continuation. The passage width varies from 6 feet near the entrance to approximately 12 feet at its lowest point. There are no side chambers, no significant formations, no features of particular geological interest. The cave is not gated or restricted. A short trail leads to its entrance from a forest road, and visitors occasionally explore its modest depths with flashlights and headlamps. Most find it unremarkable, a hole in the ground, interesting for perhaps 10 minutes, not worth a second visit. The 1967 survey was supposed to confirm what everyone already knew. The survey was authorized in March of 1967 as part of a broader inventory of cave resources in Pike National Forest. The Forest Service had received funding for geological assessments of several known caves in the region, primarily to evaluate their potential for recreational development or scientific study. The team assigned to Cave of the Clouds consisted of 3 individuals: Howard Elliston, a Forest Service geologist with 20 years of experience; Margaret Whitaker, a cartographer who had worked on cave surveys throughout the Southwest; and Daniel Okafor, a seasonal ranger who served as the team's logistics coordinator and safety officer. According to Forest Service records, the team entered Cave of the Clouds on June 14, 1967, at approximately 8 in the morning. They were expected to complete their survey within a single day. Standard procedure called for a written report to be filed within 2 weeks of the survey's completion. No report was ever filed. The Forest Service archives contain a single document related to the 1967 survey, a brief memorandum dated July 3, 1967, noting that the Cave of the Clouds assessment had been completed and that the cave does not warrant further study or development. The memorandum is unsigned and provides no data, no measurements, and no description of what the team observed. Howard Elliston retired from the Forest Service in 1972. Margaret Whittaker transferred to the Bureau of Land Management in 1969 and died in 1987. Daniel Okafor remained with the Forest Service until 1994, working at various ranger stations throughout Colorado. He died in 2017 at the age of 81. It was Okafor's death that brought the survey back to light. Daniel Okafor's estate was handled by his daughter, Constance, and his nephew, James Adeyemi. Among his possessions, stored in a filing cabinet in the basement of his home in Cannon City, they found a folder labeled simply Clouds, 1967. The folder contained 23 pages of handwritten notes, 7 pages of typed draft text, and 4 hand-drawn maps. The documents were unsigned and undated, but the handwriting matched samples of Okafor's writing from other personal papers. Constance Okafor contacted the Forest Service in January of 2018, offering to donate the materials to their archives. A Forest Service historian named Dr. Rebecca Tsosi reviewed the documents and recognized their significance. The materials appeared to be a partial draft of the never-filed survey report, and they described a cave that bore no resemblance to the official record. The documents described Cave of the Clouds as extending significantly beyond the known 62-foot depth, Tsosi wrote in an internal assessment. The draft references a lower chamber of considerable size, accessible through a passage that is not depicted on any existing map of the cave. The chamber is described as approximately 120 feet in length and 40 feet in width, with a ceiling height of at least 30 feet. The draft also referenced something else, something that transformed a routine geological survey into a mystery that remains unexplained. Material evidence suggesting extended human habitation, the document read. Fire rings, bone fragments, stone tools of uncertain provenance, wall markings, significant accumulation of debris consistent with long-term occupation, requires immediate assessment by qualified archaeologist. No archaeologist was ever assigned to Cave of the Clouds. No follow-up survey was conducted. The official record continued to describe a 62-foot cave with no significant features. Dr. Tsosi's assessment prompted a review of other Forest Service records from 1967. She found no correspondence mentioning the Cave of the Clouds survey, no requests for archaeological consultation, no evidence that anyone had followed up on the team's apparent discovery. She did find one anomaly, a personnel record showing that Howard Elliston had requested and been granted a 3-month leave of absence beginning in August of 1967, approximately 6 weeks after the survey. The reason given was personal matters. Elliston returned to work in November and continued with the Forest Service until his retirement 5 years later, but his personnel file contains no further cave-related assignments. Tsosi attempted to locate Elliston or his descendants for comment. Elliston died in 1989. His wife died in 2002. They had no children. His personal papers, according to county records, were disposed of after his wife's death. No documents related to the 1967 survey have been found among his effects. Margaret Whittaker's family was more accessible. Her son, Thomas Whittaker, responded to Tsosi's inquiry with a brief email. "My mother never talked about her work in detail," he wrote, "but I remember one conversation probably in the late 70s. I asked her about caves. I was interested in caving at the time, thinking about joining a grotto. She told me there were some caves that shouldn't be explored. When I asked what she meant, she said, 'Sometimes you find things that were hidden for a reason.' She wouldn't say more." Thomas Whittaker had no knowledge of the Cave of the Clouds survey and no documents from his mother's career. The maps found in Okafor's papers present the deepest puzzle. There are 4 of them, hand-drawn in pencil on graph paper, depicting what appears to be a multi-level cave system. The first map shows the known entrance passage, the 62-foot descent documented in previous surveys. But it also shows a continuation, a narrow horizontal crawlway at the base of the known passage, leading approximately 40 feet to a vertical drop. The second map depicts this vertical drop, a pit approximately 25 feet deep, widening as it descends. The third map shows the lower chamber of considerable size, referenced in the draft text. The chamber is drawn as roughly rectangular, with annotations indicating dimensions and notable features. Along the eastern wall, a series of small circles are labeled fire rings 7. Along the western wall, a wavy line is labeled wall markings, petroglyph. At the chamber's northern end, a narrow passage is drawn leading further into the rock, marked with a question mark and the notation continues, depth unknown. The fourth map is incomplete. It appears to show the beginning of this northern passage, but the drawing stops abruptly. A single word is written at the edge of the paper, enough. Constance Okafor provided additional context about her father in a 2019 interview with a journalist researching the case. "Dad was a quiet man," she said. "He loved the outdoors, loved his work, but there were things he wouldn't talk about. The war, he served in Korea, and certain assignments from his Forest Service years. I learned not to ask." She recalled one incident from her childhood, probably around 1975. "I found that folder in his desk. I was maybe 12, snooping around like kids do. He caught me looking at the maps. He didn't yell. Dad never yelled. But he took the folder away and told me never to touch it again. He said some things were better left alone." When asked if her father had ever mentioned Cave of the Clouds by name, Constance shook her head. "Not once, not in 50 years. Whatever happened there, he kept it to himself until the day he died." James Adeyemi, Okafor's nephew, offered one additional detail. Uncle Daniel was a practical man, not superstitious, not religious, not prone to exaggeration. But there was one thing he said to me once, maybe 10 years before he passed. We were talking about his career, the places he'd worked. I asked him what the strangest thing he'd ever seen was. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "The things we find in the dark aren't always meant to be found." That's all he would say. In the summer of 2019, Dr. Sosi organized an unofficial survey of Cave of the Clouds, accompanied by 2 experienced cavers and a photographer. They found the cave exactly as described in the official record, a single descending passage, 62 feet deep, terminating in a flowstone floor. There was no horizontal crawlway, there was no vertical drop, there was no lower chamber. "We searched carefully," Sosi wrote in her notes. "The walls are solid limestone. The floor shows no indication of any passage or opening that might have been sealed. If the chamber Okafor's maps describe ever existed, there is no trace of it now." She added, "I am left with 2 possibilities. Either the 1967 team documented something that has since been sealed by natural geological processes or by human intervention, or the documents in Okafor's estate describe a cave that never existed. Neither explanation is satisfying." The Forest Service has taken no official position on the discrepancy. The documents from Okafor's estate have been archived but not cataloged. Cave of the Clouds remains open to the public, its official depth still listed as 62 feet. The draft report found in Daniel Okafor's basement ends mid-sentence, in a section describing the wall markings in the lower chamber. "The markings appear to be intentional," the text reads, "not random scratches or natural formations. They depict figures that are roughly humanoid, but with proportions that do not match any known artistic tradition. The largest figure stands approximately 4 feet tall and shows what appears to be..." The sentence does not continue. The next page is blank. Whatever Howard Elliston, Margaret Whittaker, and Daniel Okafor found in Cave of the Clouds in June of 1967, if they found anything at all, they chose not to share it with the Forest Service, with their colleagues, or with their families. They completed their survey. They returned to their normal duties. And they never filed their report. 3 people descended into a cave in 1967. They saw something, or nothing. They documented it, or invented it. They kept silent for the rest of their lives. The cave is 62 feet deep. The official record is clear. But somewhere in a filing cabinet in a Forest Service archive, 4 hand-drawn maps describe chambers that do not exist, passages that lead nowhere, and a wall covered in figures that are almost human. And at the edge of the 4th map, in the handwriting of a man who never spoke of what he saw, a single word marks the boundary between what was recorded and what was left in the dark. Enough. The compasses didn't fail. They found something. Dinosaur National Monument straddles the border between Colorado and Utah, a landscape of high desert canyons and exposed sedimentary rock that preserves one of the world's richest concentrations of Jurassic-era fossils. Most visitors come to see the dinosaur bones, a quarry wall containing over 1,500 fossils, protected within an enclosed visitor center on the Utah side. Fewer venture into the Colorado portion of the monument, where the canyons deepen and the terrain becomes more remote. Spring Cave lies in the Colorado section, approximately 8 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a strenuous hike through the canyons of the Yampa River. The cave takes its name from a small spring that emerges near its entrance, providing a reliable water source in an otherwise arid landscape. Archaeological evidence suggests that indigenous peoples used the cave for thousands of years, and the Park Service has documented petroglyphs near the entrance dating to approximately 1,000 years before present. The cave itself extends approximately 1,600 feet into a limestone ridge, descending through a series of chambers connected by narrow passages. The Park Service has designated 7 distinct chambers, numbered in order of their distance from the entrance. Access requires a permit, and visitors must be accompanied by a ranger or demonstrate significant caving experience. Chamber 7, the deepest accessible section, has been known for decades to interfere with magnetic compasses. The phenomenon is typically attributed to iron-bearing minerals in the surrounding rock, magnetite or hematite deposits that create localized magnetic anomalies. Such interference is common in caves with certain geological compositions and is generally considered unremarkable. What happened in 2020 was not unremarkable. The 2020 survey was organized by the National Park Service as part of a periodic assessment of Spring Cave's condition. The team included Dr. Nathan Oyalaran, a geologist specializing in karst formations, Jennifer Begay, a Park Service archaeologist, Marcus Webb, a cave resource specialist, and Tomas Salazar, a contract technician responsible for ground-penetrating radar equipment. The survey began on September 15th and was scheduled to last 3 days. The team's objectives were routine: document any changes in the cave's physical structure, assess the condition of archaeological sites, and update the existing survey maps with more precise measurements. The first 2 days proceeded without incident. The team documented minor erosion in Chamber 3, photographed the petroglyphs near the entrance, and confirmed that the known passages remained stable. On the morning of September 17th, they entered Chamber 7. Webb was the first to notice the compass behavior. He had been taking directional readings at various points in the chamber, expecting the usual interference, needles spinning erratically or freezing in random orientations. Instead, he observed something different. "Every compass points the same direction," he said to the team. "Not north, not magnetic north, the same spot on the wall." The team confirmed his observation. 3 separate compasses, 2 analog and 1 digital, all indicated the same bearing, approximately 217 degrees from their position near the chamber's center. The bearing pointed directly at a section of the eastern wall, a featureless expanse of gray limestone indistinguishable from the surrounding rock. Dr. Oyalaran's field notes document the team's initial assessment. The compass convergence is anomalous. Standard magnetic interference produces random or inconsistent readings. Convergent readings suggest a localized magnetic source, a concentrated deposit of magnetite or similar mineral. However, visual inspection of the indicated wall section shows no obvious mineralogical differences from the surrounding limestone. The team spent approximately 2 hours examining the wall section. They found no visible cracks, no discoloration, no indication of any feature that might explain the magnetic convergence. The rock surface was smooth, consistent with the rest of the chamber. Jennifer Begay suggested using the ground-penetrating radar to examine the subsurface structure. The equipment designed to detect voids and variations in rock density had been brought primarily for archaeological purposes, identifying potential buried artifacts or sealed passages. Scanning a featureless wall section was not part of the survey plan, but the team agreed that the compass anomaly warranted investigation. Tomas Salazar set up the radar unit and began scanning the wall in a grid pattern, starting at floor level and working upward. The process took approximately 45 minutes. What the radar revealed changed the nature of the survey entirely. The ground-penetrating radar data showed a void behind the wall, a hollow space approximately 7 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. The void began approximately 18 inches behind the visible rock surface and extended into the limestone at a uniform depth. The shape is unusual, Salazar noted in his technical report. Natural voids in limestone typically show irregular boundaries, the result of dissolution along fracture planes or bedding surfaces. This void has regular geometry. The corners appear to be approximately 90 degrees. The walls appear to be parallel. He paused before adding his conclusion. The void is rectangular, almost perfectly rectangular. Dr. Oyalaran examined the data independently and confirmed Salazar's assessment. The void's dimensions, roughly the size of a telephone booth or a standing coffin, were inconsistent with any natural geological process he could identify. Karst dissolution does not produce rectangular voids, he wrote in his field notes. Neither does tectonic activity, erosion, or any other mechanism I am aware of. If this data is accurate, the void was either created artificially or formed through a process we do not understand. The team faced a decision: attempt to access the void or report their findings and await further instructions. Standard protocol required the latter. They documented the radar data, photographed the wall section, recorded the compass readings, and exited the cave. The survey team submitted their report to the Park Service Regional Office on September 25, 2020. The report included the radar data, the compass observations, and a recommendation for follow-up investigation, potentially including limited excavation to access the void. The response came 6 weeks later, in a memorandum from the regional director. After review of the submitted materials, we have determined that excavation of the indicated wall section in Spring Cave Chamber 7 is not warranted at this time. The radar anomaly, while interesting, does not meet the threshold for archaeological or geological significance required to justify physical intervention in a protected cave environment. The compass readings are consistent with known magnetic anomalies in the chamber and do not require further investigation. The memorandum concluded, the survey team is thanked for their thorough documentation. No further action is required. Dr. Oyalaran requested a meeting with the regional director to discuss the decision. The request was declined. He submitted a formal appeal, arguing that the rectangular geometry of the void was inconsistent with natural processes and warranted investigation regardless of the compass anomaly. The appeal was denied. Insufficient scientific justification, the denial stated. The Park Service cannot authorize excavation based on speculation about the void's origin. Tomas Salazar left the Park Service contract in early 2021, returning to private sector work in environmental consulting. Before his departure, he shared his observations about the spring cave data with several colleagues in the geophysical community. "I've been doing ground-penetrating radar for 15 years, he said in a 2022 interview with a journalist researching the case. "I've scanned hundreds of sites, archaeological digs, construction zones, cave systems. I've never seen a natural void with geometry like that, not once." He described the radar signature in technical terms. The reflection pattern shows flat surfaces meeting at right angles. The signal attenuation is uniform across the void, suggesting empty space rather than fill material. And the boundaries are sharp, not gradual, not irregular. Whatever that space is, it has walls, defined walls. When asked what he believed the void might contain, Salazar demurred. "I don't speculate about things I can't see, but I'll tell you what it's not. It's not natural. That shape doesn't occur in limestone. It doesn't occur in any rock. Someone or something made that space. And it's been behind that wall for a very long time." He added one final observation that did not appear in his official report. The compasses. Everyone focused on the fact that they pointed at the wall. But here's what I keep thinking about. Compasses respond to magnetic fields. The void is empty. The radar showed no solid material inside. So what's generating the field? What's in an empty rectangular space that's strong enough to pull every compass in that chamber toward it? He had no answer. Dr. Nathan Oyalaran retired from the Park Service in 2022 after 31 years of service. In a letter to a colleague at the Colorado School of Mines, written shortly after his retirement, he reflected on the Spring Cave Survey. "I have spent my career studying caves, their formation, their ecology, their preservation. I have seen many unusual things. But Chamber 7 troubles me in a way I find difficult to articulate," he continued. "The compass convergence is real. I observed it myself. The radar data is real. I reviewed it with Salazar repeatedly. There is a rectangular void behind that wall, and something inside it is generating a magnetic field strong enough to affect instruments 30 feet away. These are facts," he concluded. The Park Service's decision not to investigate is also a fact. I do not know if it was the right decision. I do not know what we would find if we opened that wall, but I know that we chose not to find out, and I suspect we will always wonder what we left behind. Jennifer Begay remains with the Park Service, now working at a different monument. She has not commented publicly on the survey. Marcus Webb transferred to a position in Alaska in 2021 and has not responded to interview requests. Spring Cave remains open to permitted visitors. Chamber 7 is accessible, though the difficult approach and permit requirements limit traffic to a handful of experienced cavers each year. Those who visit report the same compass anomaly documented in the 2020 survey. Needles pointing not north, not south, but toward a specific point on the eastern wall. The wall itself is unchanged, smooth gray limestone, featureless and cold, indistinguishable from the rock around it. There is no marker indicating the location of the void behind it. There is no sign explaining the compass phenomenon. There is only the rock, and behind it, a rectangular emptiness that should not exist. 18 inches of limestone separate the chamber from whatever lies beyond. 18 inches that the Park Service has declined to penetrate, citing insufficient justification. 18 inches that have stood intact for centuries, perhaps millennia, guarding a space that someone or something carved into solid rock with geometric precision. The compasses still point toward it. They have been pointing toward it for as long as anyone has measured. And behind the wall, in a darkness that no light has touched in ages beyond counting, a hollow space the size of a standing man waits in silence. Empty, according to the radar, but magnetic, powerfully magnetic, drawing every needle in the chamber toward its invisible heart. He said 3 words. The cave said, 4. Muller State Park occupies 5,500 acres of forested highlands west of Pikes Peak, a landscape of granite outcroppings, aspen groves, and meadows that attract elk and mule deer in numbers that delight wildlife photographers. The park is popular with hikers and campers, particularly in autumn when the aspen turn gold against the dark evergreens. Most visitors stay on the maintained trails, circling the lakes and climbing to overlooks that offer views of the Sangre de Cristo Range to the south. Echo Cave lies off-trail in a rocky drainage on the park's northern boundary. The cave is small, approximately 200 feet of passage, and receives little attention in park literature. A brief mention in the Visitor Center brochure notes its unusual acoustic properties and cautions that the approach requires scrambling over loose rock. Most visitors never attempt to find it. The cave's name dates to the 1920s, when early visitors to the area discovered that sounds made near the entrance returned with unusual clarity and duration. A shout could echo for 5 or 6 seconds, bouncing between the cave walls with minimal degradation. Acoustic specialists who studied the phenomenon in the 1960s attributed it to the chamber's geometry, a roughly cylindrical passage with smooth granite walls that reflect sound waves with exceptional efficiency. For decades, the cave was considered a minor curiosity, visited occasionally by acoustic students and tourists who enjoyed hearing their voices multiply in the darkness. Then people began noticing that sometimes the echoes were wrong. The earliest documented account of anomalous echoes comes from a park ranger named Dorothy Whitehorse, who worked at Muller State Park from 1951 to 1968. Her personal journals, donated to the park's archives after her death in 1994, contain an entry dated August of 1953. Took a group of Boy Scouts to Echo Cave this afternoon. The usual demonstration: clap your hands, count the echoes, explain how sound waves work. One of the boys, maybe 12 years old, shouted his name into the cave. "Tommy," he said, clear as day. The echo came back. "Tommy." Then again, "Tommy." Then a third time, but different. "Thomas." That's what we all heard. Thomas? The boy's name was Tommy Bartlett. No one had called him Thomas. Whitehorse noted that the boys were frightened, but that she dismissed the incident as a trick of acoustics, the cave's unusual properties distorting the final syllable in unexpected ways. She did not report the incident to park administration. Similar accounts accumulated over the following decades, though most remained undocumented or were shared only informally among park staff. A camper in 1967 reported that her echo added a word she hadn't spoken. A hiker in 1974 claimed his whistle was echoed back as humming. A family visiting in 1979 insisted that their daughter's laughter returned as crying. The reports were sporadic, inconsistent, and easily dismissed. Not everyone who visited Echo Cave experienced anything unusual. Most heard exactly what they expected, their own voices returning faithfully, diminishing with each repetition until silence returned. But some heard something else. The 1983 recording remains the most thoroughly documented case of anomalous echo behavior in Echo Cave. The recording was made on October 15th of that year by a sound engineer conducting informal research on natural acoustic environments. The engineer, who has consistently requested anonymity in all subsequent discussions of the case, was testing a high-quality reel-to-reel tape recorder in various locations around Muller State Park. His methodology was simple: position the microphone at a fixed point, produce a consistent sound, and record the results for later analysis. At Echo Cave, he set up his equipment approximately 10 feet inside the entrance, facing the chamber's interior. The recording that resulted is approximately 4 minutes long. For the first 3 minutes, it captures ambient sound, wind, distant birdsong, the engineer's footsteps as he adjusted his equipment. At the 3-minute mark, he begins his test. "Hello," he says clearly. A pause of approximately 1 second. Hello? Another pause. Hello? 3 utterances, evenly spaced, identical in tone and volume. The tape captures what happened next. The first echo returns after approximately 1.2 seconds. Hello, clear and recognizable, slightly diminished in volume. The second echo follows roughly 0.8 seconds later. Hello, fainter but still distinct. The third echo arrives after another 0.6 seconds. Hello, barely audible. Then, approximately 0.4 seconds after the third echo fades, a fourth sound emerges from the recording. Hello? The fourth echo is not fainter than the third. It is approximately equal in volume to the second echo, louder than it should be if it were simply a continuation of the natural decay pattern. And acoustic analysis conducted later revealed another anomaly. The pitch is different. The engineer's voice registered at approximately 120 Hz. The fourth echo registered at approximately 105 Hz. Lower, as though spoken by someone with a deeper voice. The engineer shared his recording with colleagues at the Colorado School of Mines, who conducted a formal acoustic analysis in the spring of 1984. Their findings were never published in an academic journal, but were summarized in an internal report that circulated among acoustic researchers. The recording exhibits an anomalous fourth return signal following a 3-impulse test sequence, the report stated. The signal characteristics are inconsistent with standard echo behavior. Specifically, 1. The amplitude exceeds the expected decay curve. 2. The fundamental frequency differs from the source signal by approximately 15 Hz. 3. The arrival time suggests a reflection path significantly longer than the cave's known geometry would allow. The researchers proposed several explanations. Environmental interference, perhaps a distant sound source, coincidentally producing a similar signal at the moment of recording. Equipment malfunction, a tape artifact or electronic anomaly creating a spurious signal. Geological acoustics, an unknown passage or chamber producing unexpected reflections. None of these explanations fully accounted for the data. The frequency shift is particularly problematic, the report noted. Environmental interference would not alter the pitch of the original signal. Equipment malfunction would likely produce distortion rather than a clean, shifted signal, and no known geological mechanism can lower the frequency of a reflected sound wave. The report concluded with a recommendation for further study. No further study was conducted. The engineer who made the original recording withdrew his participation from the project, requesting that his name be removed from all documentation. His reasons were never explained. Dr. Luis Paredes was a professor of physics at the University of Colorado who specialized in acoustics and wave propagation. In 1991, he obtained a copy of the 1983 recording and conducted his own analysis using more advanced digital equipment. His findings, shared in a lecture to graduate students that was later transcribed by an attendee, added new dimensions to the mystery. The fourth signal is not simply a pitch-shifted version of the original, Paredes explained. Detailed spectrographic analysis reveals subtle differences in the formant structure, the overtone patterns that give a voice its characteristic timbre. The original signal shows formants consistent with an adult male speaking in a relaxed manner. The fourth signal shows formants that suggest a different vocal tract geometry. He paused before continuing. In simple terms, the fourth echo was not produced by the same voice that made the original sound. Either someone else was in that cave, speaking at precisely the right moment with precisely the right word, which seems improbable, or the cave itself produced a response that mimicked human speech while altering its fundamental characteristics. Paredes made 2 visits to Echo Cave in 1992, attempting to replicate the phenomenon. His own recordings captured standard echo behavior, clean reflections with normal decay patterns and no frequency anomalies. He was unable to reproduce the fourth echo effect. The phenomenon may be intermittent, he wrote in his notes, or it may require conditions we do not understand. I recorded over 2 hours of test signals across multiple visits. Every echo behaved as expected. Whatever happened in 1983 did not happen for me. He added a personal observation. I found myself, on my second visit, reluctant to speak in the cave, a childish response perhaps, but I could not shake the feeling that something might answer. Reports of anomalous echoes continued through the 1990s and 2000s, though they remained sporadic and difficult to verify. A compilation assembled by a park volunteer in 2008 documented 17 separate accounts between 1953 and 2007, ranging from minor variations in echo timing to claims of entirely new words appearing in reflected sound. The most detailed account came from a geology student named Amara Okonkwo, who visited Echo Cave in September of 2005 as part of a field study on granite erosion. I was alone in the cave, taking measurements of the wall surfaces, Okonkwo wrote in a blog post several years later. I started humming to myself, just a melody, nothing specific, something to break the silence. The humming echoed back normally at first, but then I heard something that wasn't humming. It was words, someone speaking very quietly in the space where my humming should have been. She could not make out what the words said. It was like hearing a conversation from another room. You know it's speech, but you can't understand it. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, then faded into normal echo decay. I stopped humming immediately. I did not make another sound until I was outside the cave. Okonkwo did not report the incident to park staff. She has not returned to Echo Cave. Muller State Park continues to include Echo Cave in its informational materials, describing it as a site of interesting acoustic properties worth visiting for those willing to navigate the off-trail approach. Rangers occasionally lead interpretive hikes to the cave during summer months, demonstrating the echo effect for visitors who clap and shout and listen to their voices return from the darkness. Most visitors hear exactly what they expect. Their words, their sounds, their voices reflected back with remarkable clarity before fading into silence. But some visitors report hesitating before they speak. A moment of uncertainty, a reluctance to break the silence, a feeling that the cave is waiting for them to make the first sound, as though something inside needs to hear their voice before it can answer. The 1983 recording remains in the archives of the Colorado School of Mines, filed with the acoustic analysis reports and the internal memoranda that were never published. The engineer who made it has never publicly discussed the experience. His name appears nowhere in the documentation, erased at his request, as though he wanted no connection to what his equipment captured. 3 hellos sent into the darkness. 4 hellos returned. And somewhere in the space between the third echo and the fourth, in a fraction of a second that should have held only fading sound, a voice that was not his own spoke a word he had not said. The cave still echoes. 6 seconds of perfect reflection, sound bouncing between granite walls with unusual clarity. Most of the time, it echoes exactly what you say. Most of the time.